Okay, lady. July 17th, Architectural Review Board meeting. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Chair Liebert.
Present.
Board Member Malone Pritchard.
Present.
Board Member Guyer.
Here.
Board Member Lou.
Present.
Board Member Pop. Thank you.
He's been delayed. Okay. With that, we'll begin with oral communications. Members of the public may speak to any item right now that is not on today's agenda. So if there's anybody who wishes to speak to any other item, you may do so. Okay. Approval of minutes, July 3rd. I was absent. Have those been reviewed, and do I have a motion on those?
So I have a comment. I actually abstained from this one just because I hadn't reviewed the minutes, because I didn't actually get them in the packet. But they did come by email. So and that's not mentioned in the minutes.
Okay.
And then so I think what happened is on the minutes for June 5th were approved.
You mean June 3rd? Oh, June 5th. Yes.
Yeah, the actual meeting on the 5th, and then on the 19th we actually, for those minutes, we actually didn't have a quorum.
Okay.
To approve those minutes.
Okay. So why don't we just defer those until Board Member Pop joins us at whenever. Okay. With that, are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions? Okay. With that, we'll go on to the first item. This is new business. This is 385 Sherman Avenue, request by Daniel Minkoff for major architectural review of a proposal to demolish the existing 21,600 square foot one-story office building and construct a new 55,566 square foot three-story mixed-use building with 2 levels of underground parking for 103 spaces on a 27,783 square foot site in the Community Commercial District CC2 Zone District. The proposal includes a design enhancement exception for a 5-foot encroachment into the required 5-foot street side yard setback along Sherman Avenue. Environmental assessment, a mitigated negative declaration, has been prepared and will be available for public review beginning June 6th through July 7th, 2014. And this item was continued from the meeting of July 3rd, 2014. So this will be the first public hearing. We did have a preliminary review of this item previously. So, and then I understand that staff has some comments on this. The DEE has been removed, correct?
That is correct. Good morning. Thank you, Chair Lippert and board members. As you said, the application before you this morning is for a new 3-story mixed-use building. The application does include 4 residential apartment units. I'll kind of jump into some of the main issues. The board did see this project in a slightly different version back in 2009. They held a hearing. The item was continued and never brought back. So this is a similar project, similar location, similar configuration, but there are quite a few differences. The application was heard at a preliminary review, and the board did have a number of concerns at that time with the proposal. One of the big issues was the Sherman Avenue elevation and how it was a long, linear, kind of unbroken elevation. There was concerns raised about the height of the building, and the DEE was questioned at a time when we're looking at council memo talking about concern of how buildings are being built too close to the sidewalk. So the DEE was definitely questioned at that time. So there have been a number of modifications to the project since that time. One of the significant changes was the removal of the DEE, so the project is fully zoning compliant. It no longer is encroaching into the front yard setback. It actually has greater than required setbacks relative to the Birch Court neighbors of 12 feet versus the required 10. They've reduced the overall height of the building by over 4 feet, and they've actually cut out over 3,000 square feet from the building that was previously requested as exempt square footage. The city in the past has had a policy of granting exemptions for square footage for ADA compliance and for employee amenity space, and that space was not going to be allowed for this project and is no longer proposed and has been removed. So the building has shrunk quite a bit. The applicant's been able to pull back the 3rd floor and the 2nd floor relative to the Birch Court neighbors at the left side of the building. Wanted to note that the project is fully compliant relative to parking. There are 103 parking spaces proposed in a 2-level below grade parking structure. The building is within a parking assessment district. The prior building was assessed for 70 spaces based on its 21,000 square feet. So that square footage within the new building is also being provided for within the assessment district and doesn't have to be parked on site. But any new square footage over and above what exists there today has been parked in the new project. There have been a lot of neighbor concerns, and those are provided in the packet. There are several letters voicing concerns relative to height, the massing of the building, privacy issues, as well as parking and traffic. Staff believes that the application has adequately addressed these items, but obviously the board will have opportunity to weigh in and comment on those. There is a mitigated negative declaration associated with the project, and the primary reason for that is the California olive Emerson groundwater plume that is in the vicinity of the project. The project is actually within the study area, but the plume does not actually extend under the site. I spoke to the EPA yesterday, and the TCE levels in the groundwater below the site are actually quite low. So low, in fact, that they said you could actually even drink the groundwater. Not that anyone would do that. So, but there have been concerns voiced about, well, what happens when you excavate and the TCE is then suddenly exposed? And it was explained to me that TCE, the nature of it, it dissipates very rapidly. Once it's exposed to the air, it diffuses very quickly. So the only concern might be for construction workers actually down in the ditch, and there is mitigations in place within the project to address that issue, but it isn't an issue for adjacent properties in terms of somehow being exposed to dangerous levels of TCE. I believe so. I got the little red light on. So I just wanted to note that there really are no issues, and there are mitigations to back up and ensure that there are no issues related to the groundwater plume. And we have the consultant that prepared the environmental document is here today if there's any questions. This is the only public hearing, and I realize that the ARB's purview is not generally related to the environmental document, but this is an opportunity for the public to voice their concerns and questions and comments about the environmental document in a public forum. So you may get a lot of that from the people sitting here, but it is the planning director who will be the one to approve the environmental document. So with that, I will turn it over to the applicant to give their presentation. I can ask Catherine Waugh of Dudek. Do you want to add anything or just be available for questions?
Okay. What I'd like to do is just, there's an awful lot of people that are going to be speaking today. I have over 13 cards, and so I want to explain basically the way we're going to proceed here before I have the applicant make their presentation. The applicant will have 10 minutes to make their presentation, and then what I will do is I will open it up to the board for any questions they might have. We're not going to go into comments at that point. We'll just simply do questions that they have for clarifying. Then I will open up the public hearing. Members of the public, I will call you, and I will alert the speaker as well as the next person on deck so that they can prepare to speak. Each of you will have 3 minutes apiece. That'll bring us up to probably just under an hour. I know that there'll probably be another probably group of speakers that will want to speak. And then I will close the public hearing. The board will then have their deliberations. You're all invited to stay. We don't do anything behind closed doors. And then at that point, there may or may not be a motion. We'll see what happens here. And then before we vote on the motion, I will have the applicant just sort of do a short 3-minute recap if they want to respond to any of the issues from the public. So with that, let's begin with the applicant. And just so you know, this is a recording mic. It is not an amplifying mic. So please speak into the microphone so that we can capture all of your comments.
Mr. Chairman, I'm David Van Atta. I'm legal representative for the applicant. Here's a card for the secretary that I'll give to you. I just want to address that one point that is dealing with the letters and emails pertaining to the CEQA issues. And with all due respect, I think this is more of a distraction, and I think that the staff has really pointed out the facts with respect to the environmental study, and I think that what we're really focusing on here and want to focus on, and your task, as you very well know, is to deal with the design of this building, the design of the property, and how it relates to the city, and that is what we want to follow. The city has followed all of its usual protocols regarding the environmental review, and we think that that is something that, if people disagree with that, there are processes and procedures for dealing with that, but the ARB's function, as you all know, is to deal with the design of the building, and we're looking forward to your discussion. I delivered a letter to Mr. Reich stating that point just for the record, but what we want to do now is to focus on the design of the building and turn this over for the architects to give you their review, and we appreciate your time and effort as always, and look forward to your deliberations. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Is this mic working? Okay. All right. So I have to operate this computer here, which means while looking at this, you're going to be looking at the backside of me, which I apologize profusely for. So just want to go through and highlight changes to the project that staff described relative to the preliminary review that we had with all of you late last year, to have kind of a comparison of where we were, where we are on key issues. We're hopeful that the drawing set that's been provided broke these down in a very cogent way through the number of comparison sheets that we had, but I want to give you the high level here to help frame any questions you might have moving forward. Real quick, project site located here, Sherman running left to right, Ash running top to bottom. This is a 3-story mixed-use building with 2- and 3-story elements in a neighborhood of 2-, 3-, and 4-story buildings. I'm going to take you through a series of 8 key issues that I think break down some of the significant changes that we've made responding to your comments, and also reflecting some concerns we've heard from the neighbors over the last several months. First of which is the heritage oak relocations. As staff described, there are 4 oaks on the site, 2 of which meet standards for relocation and survivability, 2 of which do not. We've worked closely with the city arborist, as well as our own arborist, and in a great display of cooperation with other city departments, including utilities and public works, we've figured out a strategy to relocate these 2 oaks, which bear the standard of survivability, and place them within the easement that runs along Ash, so that those oaks can remain on site and part of the public experience of the public realm around the building. Setbacks, as staff described, there's no pursuit of a design enhancement exception in this round of the project. This is in final analysis of zoning code compliant project and proposal. Highlighting the setbacks here show that the street side setbacks are respected on Ash and Sherman. There is a full compliance in that capacity, so no longer along Sherman are we asking to move into that setback. I'll talk to you later about how that's positively affected the sidewalk experience. Along the interior property lines, we're required to have 10. We have at a minimum 12 in the first 2 stories, or even in this case, the first story along this side of the property, and a setback at the 3rd floor. The expanded sidewalk, as a result of the design enhancement exception being pulled off the table, what we've done is move from a proposed 10'8" sidewalk the last time that we had talked about this project. Back late last year, there were comments about us working to expand that, and we talked about different strategies in the hearing about how to do that. We've effectively taken a swath of area out of the building that runs along Sherman, eliminated that square footage in order for us to pull the building face back. So the net effect of that from curb to the nearest point of the structure is 15 feet 8 inches. So there's a net 5-foot gain in the public right-of-way there, which allows us an ample zone for planters, bicycle parking on site, and landscape treatments and public realm improvements in the sidewalk that make this a generous space in the neighborhood and an exceeding the sidewalk width in comparison to other portions of the neighborhood. So we think that that adds some variety to the streetscape in the dimension of curb to building, and is a net benefit to the public experience at street level. As staff said, we had taken out around 3,000 square feet out of the project. Previously had sought to be floor area that was exempt under precedent, which in previous projects we've sort of enjoyed. And we've worked closely with staff and the director in particular to remove all of those things. So essentially what we have left is kind of pure FAR. This diagram basically just shows sort of how we got there. These are the zones that we look to eliminate floor area. The blue portions are where we've kind of pushed and pulled a little bit for achieving the metrics of the design program, but also being sensitive to where those portions of the project are relative to the buildings which are on the adjacent property lines, and we can talk more about that as we go through it. Building height. We have reduced the building height 4 feet 7 inches. In fact, we've done this essentially by eliminating the floor-to-floor heights, which we were proposing previously, that took us to the full allowable height of 50 feet. This graphic just sort of illustrates how we're doing that. This also dovetails into the net effect of the building massing on the adjacent properties along Birch Court, which has a more desirable effect, a less impactful effect in terms of massing shadow and view access. Visual privacy is something that we hear loud and clear from the neighbors as being a point of concern. It's a point of concern we had to begin with, and we've done our best to try to further add to that in the design of the project. So there's a series of sections and images I want to walk you through real quick just to demonstrate the issues here. So this first section runs up here a little closer to Sherman. It's running left to right. This is through the parking ramp, the office which is above, and a small outdoor space that's close to Sherman. I'll talk to you a little bit about how that rolls into the aesthetic effect of Sherman in a minute. But there are substantial trees that will remain and that act as a visual screen between these two properties. We are furthermore adding additional trees, which I can show you in a second, to deal with visual privacy along that edge. This section runs a little farther down the page. So again, through the ramp, it's showing an outdoor deck in a similar location that you saw last time, although the width of it is a little bit less. We've provided a substantial amount of, let's call it redundant visual screening through the use of planted landscape. This would be a vertical dense element. This would be bamboo, equisetum, something along those lines. I mean, bamboo is probably the most effective in this case in order to be able to sort of put some belts and suspenders on the visual privacy of the space between the space for its use from working hours for the office uses and the neighbors across the way. This section runs top to bottom, and just in terms of my own lexicon, we're referring to this in Birch Court 3, Birch Court 1, Birch Court 2, just so that you guys understand when I make reference to that, what I'm saying. So this is the section between our project and Birch Court 2, showing the trees which already exist and trees which we are proposing to add that provide a high level of visual screening from the second floor across the way. We are calibrating the height of the fence specifically so that somebody at the edge of the office window looking up to Birch Court 2 is, we're effectively building a slightly taller fence to create visual privacy for those ground floor windows. We've provided an additional 5-foot setback and have eliminated any idea that that section of the building is usable on the outdoor space. We're going to continue to let that be usable facing the park. But again, the height of the parapet and the setback make the 3rd floor very private from the neighbors, which we hope is a net positive effect. Just a couple of quick images real fast. This is just showing, we're going to show you an image on the 2nd floor balcony looking back to our project. This is an existing photo. This is a photo montage to show the effect of the new addition of the project. So the existing trees which are there do quite an effective job of shielding from view. The tree that we are planting will get up to a similar height as those birch trees within 8 years' time. You'll see a blue line and a green line. This green line represents where the building would be if it maximized height and setback. This blue line is showing, even though the building was a little taller in the previous version, it was also set back a little bit farther. So we've calibrated the edge of the current proposal so that it's net neutral in terms of its view access and solar access along this edge. So we're doing a much better job here than what zoning would allow us to do, which hopefully isn't lost in the discussion. This view is taken from this kind of confluence of Birch Court 1, 2, and 3, looking back towards the building. This is a view of the current condition. This is a view of the proposed condition. Again, this is symptomatic of the landscape situation between these two sites, which exist now and which we will supplement. It does a pretty demonstratively good job of shielding the project from view. Again, the blue line and green line represent where zoning allows us to be where we were at the preliminary hearing. And this is the parapet line of where we are. So again, setting back significantly from where we were and what we could. Solar access. This has been studied a lot. It's in your packet. Yeah, this is the kind of the last gas here. We've gone through and analyzed how the building interacts with the existing structures to be able to try to mitigate as great as possible through these setbacks to consider their impacts on the neighbors. Sherman facade has been variegated quite a bit since you last saw it. It's not as long and uninterrupted. It's a little shorter. Details have been narrowed down a little bit to create sort of thinner edges. In the sidewalk, you can see how it works.
Can you just wrap it up here? Thank you.
Yeah, this is it. So
great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I should state for the record that that I was contacted by the applicant, and I did meet with the applicant in the applicant's office. Anyone else have disclosures to make?
I did. I did meet with the applicant in my office.
I also met with the applicant in my office.
Okay. So with that, that takes care of the disclosures. We will return to the board now for any questions. Begin with Board Member Malone Pritchard.
So Thanks for this presentation. I'd like to go back to the screening, specifically that section CC. Where I see you've done a good job of screening the ground floor and the third floor office views. But that second floor office, am I correct in hearing that it's a future tree that's going to provide that screening?
So there's existing trees and proposed trees. I have to get to the plan set to show this, but there's a landscape plan behind you, which probably is the easiest path to sort of answering this question. So this shows existing trees and proposed trees. So these existing trees right now already are fully mature and dense trees that help create this condition. We're proposing to add 4 more trees. Is our landscape architect here yet? Right, so our landscape architect is here if you have any questions about it. Just making sure this is on, sorry. Any questions about species and time for full maturity. But the idea is that we will supplement existing landscaping with what's there so that this edge fully kind of meets the standard. Does that answer your question?
I believe it does. A follow-up to that is, have you considered anything to screen it in the interim until those trees become large enough to screen the second floor?
I think that it's fair to say that the applicant is willing to explore some sort of temporary film, translucent, so we don't cut off light, but provide some visual privacy, long term, when all the trees along that edge are fully mature. I think it would be desirable for the interior effect of the building during working hours to have transparent glass, but in the short term, I think that there would be a temporary solution that the applicant would be willing to consider.
And in the packet, you provided a number of shading studies. Can you walk us through that in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So, shall I pull up the plan set with those sheets, or just give you the sort of philosophical view of how we did it? Because it can be explained in this table, but if you need the visual backup, maybe we can pull those sheets up. What would you prefer?
I'd like to see the sheets.
Okay. All right. So let's see here. So ARB Sherman sets. View. Full screen mode. Do you remember what sheet number was? 1.6.
Just for the benefit of members of the public, he's pulling up the sets that we all have at places that's also made part of the public record so that it's easy for everybody to follow along.
Okay, so I'm just going through to give everybody, there are 6 sheets specifically in the set that address how we're able to utilize the computer technology that we have at our at our disposal to try to understand design and its impacts on shading the property. We've done this in the kind of usual format that we usually do in these situations, where we've explored them at the solstice and the equinox, spring, fall, summer, and winter. Essentially, what we've done to arrive to the table that we've provided in the show, and then just sort of understanding the nature with which the building impacts. We studied various locations of step backs for the upper stories of the building, lower stories of the building, and how they affect the structures adjacent to us. The idea is that in terms of measuring impact, we set this standard. Why am I? There we go. So the point at which the existing, the zoning envelope, and the proposed design hits the vertical surface of an adjacent structure, and trying to calibrate the time of day that occurs, essentially. The existing condition, the proposed condition, and zoning envelope meet those at different times of day. Okay, and so impact on the shade studies was tried to take a common language of assessing when that hit the vertical surface. Now, it's a little bit different between Birch Court 2 and Birch Court 3 because of the orientation of those structures. But essentially what we were trying to do is discover what that metric is. When did these various massing strategies compared to the existing condition begin to move up the vertical surface, because that's tantamount to view access and solar access as well. So the numbers that go along with that are based on that common language.
So actually, I think that answers my question, because I was curious as to why I was seeing 2:45 and 3 o'clock and 3:15 different times on the different faces.
It's the point at which we hit the vertical surface, right? So the existing condition hits it at a later time of day than the proposed condition. The proposed condition hits it at a different time of day than the zoning envelope would get to. So it's just a point to establish that timeline, if that makes sense. Does that help?
That answers it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Vice Chair Pop.
I don't have anything at this time.
Board Member Guyer.
I don't either at this point.
Board Member Liu. Do you have any questions?
So I do have a follow-up question to the previous landscape screening question, which was so you're proposing to remove a lot of the trees on the site, right? And then I think there are new magnolias being planned between buildings 2 and Birch Court 2 and 3 and your project, and so I do have a question about those. I mean, typically, they're used widely in suburban locations, and including Palo Alto. They generally have very spreading, very horizontal root system, and I'm sort of very concerned that in this very confined space, you really only have like 5 feet of planting area because the garage extends beyond the footprint of your building. That it may not be the best location for that particular tree, and I was wondering if you could sort of explain the selection of the tree.
I'm going to hand that off to the landscape architect.
Yeah, it's detailed. Okay. I know it's a detailed question.
Hi. My name's Todd with Crail Landscape Architecture, and so the particular magnolia tree that we picked is actually a more narrow but vertical tree, and so in terms of the health of the tree, we think it's going to be fine. It's not going to be like the magnolia trees that you see along University Avenue. They're not the grandiflores, which are like 40 feet wide. These are about 20 feet wide and about 35, 40 feet tall. And so they should be fine in those narrow planter areas. And then there's also other things that we can do for the concrete paving to allow like a porous sort of situation that would allow the roots to grow better, and we believe they'd be fine in that location.
And then you understand that the basement is extending. Like I understand elsewhere on the site, like the oak trees, that the oak tree roots could go underneath the sidewalk, but in this case, like the basement's going straight in. It's going.
You're correct. But we still have, I think, 6 feet wide in that area. We believe that should be substantial.
Okay, and I do understand that I do understand it was like a narrower canopy, but I was wondering if that applies to the roots as well, because it could have a very. I'm fairly well versed in the regular magnolia grandiflores, and it's pretty extensive horizontal root system.
Many trees have horizontal root systems, like just as you're describing. And in this condition, with proper irrigation and a higher quality soil, they should be fine. 6 feet is, it's certainly not ideal, but the trees will still be very healthy.
Okay, and I have another question related to trees. So
sure.
the oak trees that are being relocated.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you had reviewed that with the trash requirements. So I think we've got like the standard conditions of approval are asking for a 20-foot vertical clearance.
Yeah.
And then I just want to note that the Ash Street is really narrow, and so there's no, like, for example, there's no parking on that side of Ash Street. So you actually have the cars and trucks right at the curb line, which is different than a regular suburban street. And at least in my neighborhood, you know, the garbage trucks, when they have the arm swing, I mean, it takes out tree limbs that are above even like I think maybe above 14 feet.
Yeah, I mean, there will be some pruning of the trees, but I'll let Rob talk about this a little bit more.
Make sure I'm still on. Let me get to first floor plan, if I could. So many sheets in a PDF viewer. Okay. Let me just zip through here. I just want to get to the ground floor, Alex, sorry. Or A2, okay, hang on. Well, this floor plan doesn't actually show the trees. Let me go. I should go to the landscape plan. Actually, that's probably better. So I got to go back. Sorry for the delay here. Just a lot of sheets. Okay, here we go. So I don't know why this laser pointer is not. I'm just going to point with my hands if that's okay. So some of this, Alex, is really just a derivative of where the trash room is relocated to the trees. So part of the answer to that question I think Todd alluded to is a little bit of how we shape and prune those trees for their health and longevity, but also the access you talk about. The trash room is located basically in the middle of that, right, in between there, so that I think we just need to stage the trucks for pickup in such a manner that they exist between those two trees, and we've done that by where the placement of the trash room is relative. It's actually quite helpful. They're not directly in front, which would sort of encourage maybe bad behavior relative to the trash pickup to those trees. So I think that that's mitigated by the placement of the trash room, the location of the trash room. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I have a follow-up question to that. Is that how do you navigate the dumpsters around the existing transformers?
So there is a space you can see, and I think that the final detail of that, we've gone through our DRC process and have talked with Waste Disposal about how to do this. There is a fairly significant space, the exact dimension of which is probably around 8 feet or so, between the pad of that transformer and where the landscaping area starts, to be able to move dumpsters out of the door straight out. The intent is to create a pretty straight line for the removal of the dumpsters and pulling those to the curb. So that, again, sort of happens right out in this zone. A little more biased to this tree to the top, but still in between, such that we can, we've got an ability to sort of make that pickup happen in I think, a painless way. So it's a pretty one-to-one in and out situation with the location of the trash store. Make sense?
Okay, and I think I'm out of time at the moment, so I will pass the baton.
Actually, we don't have any other questions. Do you have any additional questions you'd like to ask? You may do so.
Okay. So in the conditions of approval, it mentions that the residential units have to have air conditioning as a mitigation measure, and I was wondering where those mechanical units are, if they're located on the face of the building or they're located on the roof.
Well, so that condition of approval has come at a late stage in the design process. I mean, I think the final details of that will be to emerge. The condensing locations for that would suggest that we don't place those on the roof directly above the residential units because we have an inhabited roof terrace for the office building. So the final solution of that, whether that's a through-wall unit specifically or the condenser is remotely located on top of the office building and the air handling units, a PTAC unit in, a pancake unit in the restroom that pulls outside air through a duct. We have to work that out. Our prejudice would be to locate the condensing unit in a way that it's not a through-wall system and that it would be remote from the experience of the office floor. So all of that leads to probably a remote small condensing location up on top of the office building and the air handling unit interior.
Got it. And then the garage has to have an exhaust, and so where is that exhausting?
So let me go back to the plan here. Final size isn't located. I'll just stay on this plan. So we have a couple of significant chases through the middle of the structure to allow us the adequate vertical evacuation of the fans that would be on the roof to sort of pull that out. So
it'll
the
go to the
idea is
roof,
they're
not
located
the-
in the core at the center of the building.
Great. So it's not going out to the side near the
Exactly.
residence.
Exactly.
Good. I just have a comment about that. Like, it's not our, I think it's not our particular purview on this, but my understanding is that Title 24 is reducing ventilation requirements for garages in an attempt to save energy. And then I would think that that might be an issue with the TCE issue if there's any vapor coming up through the garage. So I would just be mindful of that.
Right.
That's not typically one of the board's concerns. I have a question for staff. So in one of the conditions of approval, I think you're trying to restrict the office balcony hours. And I was wondering about the enforceability of that. Like, I don't recall seeing this in recent history, and I do understand it's a concern of the neighbors. And I know that we have issues with code enforcement sometimes in the city. So I was wondering what would happen, like, theoretically in the future. I mean, they would have to call the code enforcement, right? And then what would code enforcement do? They would use like the standard, I mean, they would probably look at the standard noise ordinance in the city, and they wouldn't necessarily look at a building department, a planning department condition, right?
No, in this case they would. This is a condition specific to this location, and it wouldn't just be simple compliance with the noise ordinance. It would be required that they not use the space, late into the evening after normal business hours, or create issues. So of course it will be subject to the noise ordinance, but above and beyond that, they will be limited in terms of the timeframes that they can use that space and the types of activities that can take place there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
The mobile mic there.
Dan Minkoff, I'm the applicant. The way we would address that, in addition to everything that Russ said, is this is something we've done with other buildings that have similar situations, is we also put in our leases. So in the same way the lease says you can use office uses, you can't put in industrial use in this building because it's in office use. We also put in the lease language that these spaces are only allowed to be used this time of day, no amplified noise, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. I have another question, which is, I think in the applicant's letter, they mentioned that they were going to implement a transportation demand management program. And I think normally that would be required, right? If you're doing like a parking reduction, I think the planning department would typically require that. Is my understanding that it's not required, but are they doing this voluntarily? And then if it's voluntary, then what oversight does the planning department have over it?
Not being the transportation guy, I can't speak to that significantly, but it is voluntary. There is no requirement that they do implement a TDM plan, but they have voluntarily provided one, and so the expectation is that they would follow that plan, just like with any other aspect of the project that isn't adhered to. We would have to follow up if for some reason they weren't following that plan, but the expectation is that they will follow it.
Great. And then I have a question for you, Russ. Are all the transportation department's comments in the staff report? I didn't really see. I was looking for them, but I didn't really see anything. But
there actually were no special conditions of approval from transportation. They've analyzed the traffic analysis provided by the project, and they find it satisfactory, and they had no additional conditions to add.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the questions I have at this time.
Okay. At this time, we'll open the public hearing. I just want to let the public know that a couple of things. We want to keep this pretty informal. We want people to, this is a discussion, so we want you to speak to the board. It would be very helpful for members of the public to identify when they're speaking specifically to the design of the building versus the mitigated negative declaration. That would be particularly helpful. And then I have several speaker cards here that are ceding their time to William Ross. Members of the public are permitted to do that. I have a total of 8 speaker cards, including Mr. Ross's here. So Mr. Ross will have a total of 24 minutes to speak to the board. Mr. Ross, would you like to address the board first, or would you like to address the board as the last speaker?
Why don't I do it as the last speaker?
Okay, that sounds fair. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask staff to give the microphone to the public, and you may stay where you're located and just simply stand up to address the board. And we'll begin with Ann Steinel. Right. Okay, well, you could have had Mr. Ross go first, but he decided to go last. And that will be followed by Mary Ryan, and you will each have 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning. My name is Ann, and I live at Birch Court. I serve on the homeowners board. You have with you, because this only became available on Friday afternoon, I couldn't write you anything. So you have a copy. I'm very concerned about the project, that it is not ready for approval. It's been pushed forward rapidly, and it has not shown sensitivity to Birch Court. It does not give us much privacy. I'm not against development. I'm here to ask you, please, to establish a balance between new development and quality of life in our city. So when we do build in Palo Alto, what we build is for the common good and not for the developers. I give you 3 concerns in writing related to the project, and I'm sorry I can't go into detail here, but we still feel the building is massive, that the plans do not respect the scale of our neighborhood. You have some color photos if they made it to you in color. The mitigated negative declaration will be addressed elsewhere, but I would like a plan that has more thorough analysis, provides protection, and has a mitigation monitoring plan. The traffic and parking problems are worsening. The real parking problem was deferred, and I think the arborist report from March is really no longer current. It doesn't have complete information, and it should be revised. There's only 6 trees remaining. I also have a landscaping background. And of those 6 trees, only 1 is given a high chance of surviving. I want to know whether the current excavations and the loss of sunlight are really going to kill our trees. Also, some of the photos, some of the depictions show trees that don't exist, and that one photo, it manages to catch this one birch tree that's way out on the corner. If you walk behind that birch, it's bare. We have no more trees along building 2. We rely on the liquid ambers on the other side. Almost all but 3 were removed, and those 3 have only a moderate chance of surviving. On a more personal note, I want to say that the plans have not given much consideration to the residents of Birch Court. We were better off with the preliminary plans of December 5.
30 seconds.
Oh, okay. The current plans, we have no daylight plane. The current plans do not respect our privacy or the quiet of our homes. It's proposing those 2 new employee decks directly facing our homes on the north side, 1 on the 2nd level, 1 on the 3rd. Sherman already has a 2,075 square foot roof garden. They have 3rd floor walkways, and they can, around Sherman and Ash, and they have outdoor common areas and a side yard. They don't need our decks. That deck is directly across from me, 12 feet over the fence. Our whispers echo around us. It is a nightmare for us. We met with them and we begged them to remove the walkways, and instead they pushed back and they created decks. That's how you get rid of amenities. You create amenities on the outside of the building.
could wrap it up.
please remove any decks and any walkways facing our residences.
Thank you very much. And we have your letter here. Mary Ryan, followed by Brenda Lowen. And if there are any other speakers, please get your cards into the clerk here.
My name is Mary Ryan. I live at 302 Grant Avenue. I feel that this project presents a unique threat to public health. The site's within just a few hundred feet of 10 outdoor eating establishments, among them Pro Bono, Joni's Cafe, Spice Kit, and the people who brown bag in Sarah Wallace Park. The excavation and removal of contaminated soil in close proximity to outdoor eating establishments is a public health hazard. The developer can't ensure the health of the people who eat at these establishments if we don't know the current levels of toxicity in the soil and if the question of proximity has not been raised. I tried to review, there was hardly any time, the 1,700 pages of documentation, and there wasn't one mention of the proximity to these eating establishments. Now, I didn't talk to the EPA yesterday. I relied on the data that was in the file. According to the plans, there's going to be 44 days of excavation, 44 days when soil is being displaced, dumped into trucks, carried on the wind, and moved through the streets. I don't think it's asking too much to get a complete evaluation of the current level of toxicity and a soil management plan prior to approval. Phase 1 environmental site assessment concluded, this is their site assessment, and it was done in 2013, said in 5 different places that the contaminated soil and the contaminated water were concerns. In 2009, the last time, and that's too long ago, that the soil was actually tested, it was found to be at up to 8.6 micrograms per liter. That's 72% higher than the state maximum of 5. That is what is in the file. The persons who did that assessment said that the most reliable method of evaluating the subsurface conditions is through intrusive techniques, and they did not do those. The MDN states that in a groundwater quality letter that they reviewed the monitoring wells. There are no monitoring wells on the site, and that report said that no new site data was collected as part of that effort. We know that the toxic plume is below 385 Sherman, and we know the soil's contaminated. We just don't know the current levels of contamination. The mitigation measure says that they're going to use the previous environmental investigation at the site. I'm saying that it's a disregard of public health to rely on old data. The only thing we're asking for is a current assessment of the current levels of toxicity and a soil management plan that will take those into effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. If you could pass this to Brenda Lowen, who will be followed by Pat Beatty. Beatty.
Thank you. I'm the person who lives on the second floor of that CC2 picture, and I'm very happy that Ms. Pritchard was concerned about me. This is my big concern, is privacy, and I want to thank Mr. Liu for bringing up the privacy screen of the trees. And I hope I can believe what Todd said, because reading some of the earlier arborist literature results, it sounds like a lot of those roots are going to be compromised since it's narrow. The planting area between the two buildings is narrow. So I really hope you're right, because right now I see trees and sky and nobody looking into my apartment, because my balcony, my living room, my second bedroom all face the new building. So if that screen works, I'll be very relieved. I also want to thank Mr. Mencken for listening and pushing back the third floor, the roof going, the whole floor going back away from my field of vision. And so if an air conditioner has to be put on the top, I'm hoping it's going to be way towards Sherman, so that at least I'll have a flat roof and no more extensions on the top. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Pat Beatty, followed by Peter Holland.
Can I walk over and point out a picture?
You can go anywhere you like, as long as you stay in the room.
Okay, I'm Pat Beatty, and I live at Birch Court in Building 3 over here, and we're facing this wall where for 25 years I've looked out and seen sky, and now there's going to be a wall, but it's being slowly tapered back, which is helpful. And I had some concerns. Our parking garage comes out right here, and their garage is here, and we have a handicapped fellow who parks a van right here at the stop sign, and it's hard to see when I come out in the mornings to go to work and make left turns. And I thought with trucks and a lot of vehicles going in and out here, it's a little tricky. I was kind of curious why they didn't move it down somewhere. I work at the Palo Alto Clinic, and we have an entrance in the middle of our building, and I notice over on Park they're building a large structure, and they kind of have an entry ramp in the center there also. And the courthouse is over here. It's a very, very tall building, and I noticed there's a 4-lane street there with a median in it, so there's quite a gap. We're not looking right into a tall building. When the Palo Alto Housing Corporation built these condominiums, about 30 years ago, it looks like the architect planned very carefully to blend in with the neighborhood. And the tallest building is over on the far corner near the courthouse, and then they slowly taper down. So this is quite a large structure that's going in next to us. Then I also noticed that the construction can take place from 9 till 6 on Saturdays, and it's like that's the one day we can keep our doors open and get some ventilation. Otherwise, we kind of have flat surface. There's no real cross ventilation. And I thought on Saturdays, is anybody at the city available in case we have questions or someone needs to come out and check anything? It seems like the offices would be closed. Then Sunday, there's the farmer's market, and there's just a large parking lot across from here, and everything is totally packed. Birch Street's busy. They've got, during the week, they have cars now parking on Birch, which narrows it from 4 lanes down to 2 lanes so that the California Avenue construction can take place. I was looking at the plans, and I noticed there's something called a switch gear enclosure. I'm not quite sure what that is down here on this lower level. That's something I'd like to find out about. Let's see.
30 seconds.
I think those are kind of my main concerns. I was a little curious on like a comprehensive plan for the city of Palo Alto, like the office space versus the housing space, and how that ratio is working out, and how many vacant office spaces we have now in the city, and what need this is going to serve. I understand it'll bring in a lot of tax revenue, though.
Great. Thank you very much for your comments. Peter Holland, followed by Kevin Kaiser?
Kaiser.
Yeah, Kaiser.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Peter Holland. I live at Birch Court and have for 30 years. I want to make 3 comments about this proposed project. Briefly, they are at the project scale, about the privacy issues, and about the zoning issues. About the project scale, I believe this project is too massive for the small site that it sits on. I know many of you have gone out and seen it, and I'm sure you believe it's a quite narrow site. The project rises to 45 feet and really towers over the two-story condominium building that we're calling Birch Court 2. I want to note that the applicant's plans show the project as lower than the four-story building at Birch Court. That's figure A03, the central figure. But the applicant has told me that the project is as high as the four-story building. Thus, the central figure that they used to introduce the plans on A03 is incorrect and presents a distorted view of the scale of the project. I also want to point out that this project trumpets the addition of 4 market rate units. But to get there, they have to significantly degrade the living conditions for 19 existing homeowners. And I want to point out that all of these homes at Birch Court were part of the Palo Alto Housing Corporation's development project. And the majority of the 19 affected homes are in the BMR program. And I'm just curious why the city didn't address that. Privacy issues. The project shows balconies at Birch and Sherman. These balconies directly overlook the private entrances for 9 of my homeowners. I question why it's considered appropriate for an office building to have balconies that practically encourage privacy invasions. Finally, about the zoning. My understanding is the applicant relies on the CC2 next to RM40 multifamily adjacency to allow the project to go up to 50 feet, now scaled back to 45 feet. But I want to point out that 40% of this project is not next to RM40. It's next to Sarah Wallace Park. I believe this is essentially a loophole that permits the developer to avoid the zoning standard that should apply in this condition, and that the city should use its discretionary ability to require that the application for a conditional use permit be applied for. After all, this is a permanent change to the park, to the visitors to the park. And I can't escape the feeling that the city is essentially giving away the public benefit of the park to a private developer for a private use. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If you could pass the microphone to Kevin Kaiser, followed by Sue Kaiser.
My name is Kevin Kaiser. I live at Birch Court. Members of the Architectural Review Board, thank you for hearing me today. You are facing a complex decision based on numerous difficult issues with 385 Sherman. There are legal issues such as the legality of the 30-day review period for the proposed mitigated negative declaration when most of the document, over 1,700 pages of appendices, was not even available until 4 days after the end of that period. I hope all of you had time to read the 57 pages of original MND, the 1,715 pages of missing appendices, and the 184 pages of your own staff report. There are moral issues such as whether or not a resident of Palo Alto has a right to have access to a reasonable amount of sunshine during the day for their home. The sun will disappear behind this new building 4 or 5 hours earlier than it does now. That's a lot of light lost for the rest of my life. There are health issues, such as what might be the effect of exposing not just Birch Court residents to the toxic effects of releasing unknown amounts of TCE into the air, but also the employees and customers of the many nearby eateries and stores. The soil testing that the developer is relying on is from an outdated report that is more than 5 years old, and even then had at least one sample that was 72% above the legal limit. Can you really let this project proceed without knowing what is currently going on in this soil? There are construction issues, such as the demolition of a building that is riddled with toxins such as asbestos and lead-based paints. Shouldn't the master plan include procedures to protect the environment and the community? And since this building is much bigger than the existing building, shouldn't there also be a reviewable working plan for the excavation and building support system? There are operational issues for the finished building, such as sound levels from the heavy-duty rooftop air conditioners, especially as they age, traffic congestion from the arrivals and departures of large numbers of workers, morning, noon, and night, and the undersupply of parking places for a building this size. The parking issue alone should be enough to put the brakes on this plan, as the number of parking spaces provided is barely enough to accommodate the differential square footage of office space and relies on city parking for the amount of square footage of the original building. This sounds like a very self-serving interpretation of the rules. I'm sure that you are all very aware of these types of issues. I hope so, because the future quality of my lifestyle and happiness as a resident of Palo Alto is about to be decided by you and how you react to all these issues. I ask that you consider these issues, that as you consider these issues, you also consider the people involved, the many Palo Alto residents and workers who inhabit the working spaces around this project versus the lone developer who does not even have a Palo Alto address. The plan for 385 Sherman is obviously incomplete and impractical, and I ask that you reject Mr. Minkoff's proposal. Thank you.
Sue Kaiser, followed by Robert Moss. And before you get started, Mrs. Kaiser, anyone else who has speaker cards, please get them in at this time. Okay.
I have been fortunate to enjoy a quiet and peaceful life at Birch Court for 30 years, and I'm very concerned about the negative impact the proposed massive building at 385 Sherman will have on my own health and quality of life and that of my neighbors. I am a writer and am at home all day, every day. It fills me with apprehension when I think of the loud noise of demolition and construction, which will be taking place not down the block, which would be bad enough, but 12 feet from my home all day long, 6 days a week, for months, or if this is anything like other projects in the area of the same size and scope, for years. I am aware of the toxic plume under the proposed site, and I am aware as well that the Environmental Protection Agency issued a health assessment concluding that TCE from the toxic plume is far more toxic and carcinogenic than previously assumed. Being 12 feet away from the excavation, I will be unable to avoid breathing in dangerous toxins like TCE from the toxic plume, as well as numerous other toxins like asbestos dust and lead from the demolition of the old building. I would be concerned about lengthy and daily exposure to these things even if my immune system was normal, but I had the misfortune of being born with a compromised immune system. Consequently, I'm ultra-sensitive to loud noise and vibration, and my doctor has told me that no amount of exposure to toxins is acceptable, as my body is congenitally incapable of eliminating toxins once I am exposed to them. For me, the months or years of exposure from demolition and construction pose a life or death situation. My husband and I live on the ground floor at Birch Court, halfway along Building 2. Ironically, my home is one of the closest to Mr. Minkoff's proposed project, and I'm one of the least able to tolerate the negative impact of exposure to environmental toxins and noise. I have no wish to be the canary in the coal mine, yet that is the untenable position in which I find myself. Imagine how you would feel if you or your own family members were forced to live 12 feet away from noisy demolition and construction all day long, 6 days a week for months or years, and were exposed 24/7 to dangerous toxins like TCE, asbestos, dust, or lead. Imagine the daily stress levels generated from all that noise and poison. I doubt whether you would allow that to happen to your loved ones. And after the construction is over, what will we have to look forward to? The small amount of sunlight we now enjoy will be gone, and the peace and quiet and privacy we currently have will be replaced by noisy rooftop air conditioning units with a much larger, closer building, and 3 stories of workers conversing on outdoor walkways and looking down into our homes and balconies, and much more traffic in the area. Our only view will be of a massive concrete wall. I love Palo Alto and have enjoyed living here, but I feel that if this project is approved, of necessity to protect my health, I will be chased out of my home for the next couple of years and will have far less quality of life to look forward to upon my return. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. The next speaker is Rita, and the last name is illegible. Is that verbal? Varel.
I think Bob Moss was going to go next.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bob Moss, then Rita Varel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to address the hazardous materials report, which is inadequate. For 25 years, I've been on the board of directors of the Barron Park Association, which is the community organization which oversees the toxic sites in Palo Alto. And for 15 years, I've been a member of the Moffett Field Restoration Advisory Board, which oversees the toxic sites at Moffett Field and Mountain View, so I'm very familiar with toxic problems. One of the problems, of course, is that there are significant levels of TCE in the soil and groundwater under the site, and the mitigation is inadequate. For example, it talks about testing 2 locations in the underground garage, EPA would never allow that kind of testing because people don't live in the underground garage. They require testing in the residential areas and in the occupied office areas. Several reasons. First of all, the level of PCE which is allowed in residential areas is only 0.5 ppb. In office areas, it's 2. It used to be 4. A year and a half ago, EPA significantly reduced the toxic levels which were allowed in both residential and commercial areas. About a year ago, they found out that exposing a pregnant woman to only 3 weeks of low levels of TCE is seriously likely to cause birth defects of the fetus. That is not addressed in the MND. The garage is going to be 2 levels down, 26 feet, penetrating a contaminated aquifer. The MND says nothing about the potential for that aquifer leaking into the building. At 200 Sheridan, which is a 2-level underground garage, the aquifer leaks into the garage, carrying the toxic materials with it. But that building was built before we knew about the toxic problems. Now we know about them. There is no excuse for not addressing them. Another problem, 50,000 square feet of office space will create a minimum of 350 workers. So the garage level is inadequate. You're going to have more parking. The only way to address this, to minimize the need for an underground garage and for excess parking, is to reduce the scale of the building. Cut it in half, and you might be able to make some modifications to the toxics mitigations, which will keep people from dying. I'm very concerned about the mitigations and their inadequacy and the toxic problems that the people on the site will have. Furthermore, during the actual mitigation, they're going to be extracting the toxic soil and the gas and expanding it out into the air. So it's going to disperse around the entire neighborhood. Not a good idea.
Rita Varel, and that'll be followed by William Ross.
I don't live at Birch Court. I live over on Channing Avenue, but I do live near a church, and I know that building these, what are they called, the patios, probably is setting up a problem where the neighbors in the future are going to have to call the police if there is activity after hours or on the weekends or whatever, or loud. And what happens from my experience is that you call the police, and they're very nice if they have time, because noise abatement on a Saturday night is not a priority in Palo Alto. They will come out when they have time, if they have time. If the noise stops or is not going on when they are there, there is no problem. I've had experiences with the church I live next to where it previously used to go on and on and on, and the solution was very long in coming, because by the time the police got there, the noise was over, but I was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. The other thing I just wonder is disclosing that you have spoken to the applicant adequate? I mean, what happened? I'm not sure about disclosure rules and regulations, but if you're speaking to the applicant, should the public not know what was said during those meetings? Part of that statement is said because of the recent grand jury investigation into the city council with the Argiala project, which was found to be inappropriate behavior. The other thing going on Bob Moss's comments, because I live over in, on the boundary of the community center, there have been several large houses that have dug down 1 or 2 levels into the ground, and there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of water that has been pumped out in building of these private residents. This was noted in a letter to the editor the other day. He estimated that 150,000 gallons was pumped out every day in building these houses. So I'm wondering if you have an aquifer there, and are you going to be pumping out water, and where is this water going? And in a time of drought, does anyone really have the right to pump out water that belongs to everyone, particularly if there may be a problem with contamination? So the other thing is, you said that you had visited the site, but I'm wondering if you have gone into the individual apartments of the people here who are concerned about noise and invasion into their privacy. Have you actually gone into their apartments and looked out their windows and spoken to them or seen what they have now and visualized this project, which does appear rather massive? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to take a moment to just clarify for Ms. Varel. Our rules allow for us to meet with not only applicants but also members of the public. Generally, when that occurs, it will not be any more than a minority of the board at any one time. And within our rules, we generally do not comment on the application. It's up to the individual, but generally it's informational in terms of receiving information from the applicant as to the scope of the proposal and any subsequent changes. It's more educational than anything. But you can direct your further comments to either the city clerk, the city attorney, or planning staff for their clarifications, okay? Thank you. Mr. Ross, for your benefit, you may stay seated if you'd like. You can even scoot up to the table if you like. You will have 24 minutes to make your presentation. And if there are any other speaker cards, please get them into a member of staff. We will be closing the public hearing at the conclusion of Mr. Ross's presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Bill Ross. I represent some residents that reside on the residential sides of this proposed project. I'd like to proceed through some comments on the mitigated negative declaration. To a certain extent, they do relate to the design because it would deal with structural capacity. I'd like to respectively begin with the concept that the Architectural Review Board itself has a mandatory duty to review and pass upon the sufficiency of the mitigated negative declaration before you make a recommendation to either the director or conceivably, if this matter goes on appeal, to the City Council. CEQA guidelines section, the one that's cited right there, provides that any advisory body of a public agency making a recommendation to the decision-making body shall consider the proposed here mitigated negative declaration before making its recommendation. Use of the word shall imparts mandatory as opposed to permissive duty. Under Municipal Code Section 18.77.5, there's a table. It clearly indicates that you have the recommendation obligation, and it's mandatory, to both the director and to the City Council on appeal. Your actual procedure, and I would note quite respectfully, that in the beginning portion of this section, 18.77, it deals with the application that's actually before you. And it says the application itself must comply with all aspects of CEQA. Well, here's an aspect of CEQA Guidelines Section 1574. So I believe respectfully that there is an obligation to not only consider the mitigated negative declaration, but to come conclusion and make findings before the recommendation proceeds. Going beyond that, I'd like to read from something that I think is applicable to many of the statements that have been made. And before I read the statement, it's from a 42-year-old case under NEPA, the predecessor to CEQA, but it's incorporated in CEQA cases. I'd really like to thank Mr. Reich. He really, is responsive. He's energetic. There are certain things we don't agree on, but I think he's an asset to this board, and he's been very helpful in this process, as have other members of staff. The statement I'd like to read is the following. Whatever is required to be considered in an environmental document must be in that formal report. What any official might have known from other writings or oral presentations cannot supply what is lacking in the report. That's from the case of Environmental Defense Fund versus Coastside Water District. It's a 1972 case. If I do my math correctly, I think that's 42 years ago. It's still the law. I think that's apropos here. Why? Well, let's start, and I would note that I don't think what I'm about to engage in is a distraction. I'm raising genuine procedural issues and substantive issues as to the environmental review and the hearing process that you engage in. What is this negative declaration? Well, I think there's some things that are important. It's already been described by other speakers as to its quantity, its availability, and so forth. But I'd like to just go through it a little bit more intricately. The MND is based on an initial study. It's actually the second part of the document. The initial study is the document that says, all right, based on substantial evidence, we do or we do not find that there's going to be an impact on the physical environment. We can find that there's going to be an impact that could be mitigated. And then based on that, there's a conclusion. There could be an EIR required, a mitigated negative declaration, or a negative declaration. So I'm going to go through both the content of that document and the specific portions of the initial study. I think that will be helpful in understanding where we're going. The project description has to be complete. Page 1 to 2 of that project description doesn't mention that the project would be subdivided. But if you go to the conditions of approval in the staff report, there's the indication that the development can be subdivided, either by a parcel map or a tentative final map. That project condition suggests that there has been segmentation or a chopping up. This is prohibited under CEQA. You want to have a comprehensive project so that all aspects of what would be proposed are going to be considered. I would note respectfully also that the original project description did not reference the DDE. The MND doesn't indicate that the project applicant signed off on the mitigation measures that are proposed. That's a requirement. That has to be in the document. But maybe more critically is it doesn't contain a mitigation monitoring program that's also required. And that has to be approved at the time that the environmental document is being approved. Now, I recognize the director's going to make that determination, but that's based on your recommendation. And again, I believe quite fairly, part of a fair hearing is a determination by you on that issue. The mitigation monitoring plan also relates directly to what's been raised both in writing and by several people today, the enforcement capability. That should say exactly who enforces these mitigation conditions and relates back also to substantive conditions that you may place on this project. And I would respectfully note, who is going to enforce a lease restriction? Does that mean that members of the adjacent owners, homeowners, have to go to court to enforce a lease restriction? Can they demand that the city attorney enforce it? Mitigation measures under CEQA have to be feasible. Basically, the definition of feasibility is being capable of being carried out with legal constraints, economic constraints, practical constraints. I'd suggest that it's mandatory that this monitoring plan be in the document, be subject to adoption, because that sets up who people can go to in enforcement. I'll speak about the experience in the neighborhood recently with respect to the lane reduction and the construction at 261 South California also, because I believe that actual circumstance is instructive as to whether there really is a remedy provided to people next door about conditions of approval or mitigation provisions. All aspects of the initial study must have a baseline for their assessment, whether it's aesthetics, biological, air quality. That's a baseline. I'd like to focus on the one dealing with air quality. In this portion of the initial study, there is reference to threshold standards of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. They are those from 2010. It does acknowledge that there is litigation on the matter, but it characterizes it as following. However, the litigation is procedural in nature and does not assert that there wasn't substantial evidence to support those standards. It's those standards that city staff use to assess air quality. Quite honestly, that's not the case. There is litigation, and the matter is Building Industry Association v. Bay Area Air Quality District. It's now before the state Supreme Court as of November of last year. In January of this year, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District issued a directive that went to all agencies, lead agencies, that make assessments with respect to air quality. I've set it forth in the written materials, but I think the important thing to summarize is that the Air Quality Management District itself said the Air Quality District is no longer recommending that the thresholds, and the thresholds were these 2010 standards, be used as generally applicable measure of a project's significant air quality impacts. The directive from the Air Quality Management District goes on to quote that the prior standards, 1999, could be used, but in any event, the local agency has to support their determination with substantial evidence in the record. It's clear in the initial study that the 1999 standards they're less restrictive. But the important point here is there's not an assessment of air quality that's based on a threshold that's legally adequate. Once I've raised an issue like this, or a member of the public raises an issue like this, and it's applicable to the other things I'd raised, it shifts the burden to the city and the applicant to come up with a response. I'd also like to comment on the construction impacts as being incompletely analyzed. There is no specific provision in the initial study that says, here are the construction impacts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's how we evaluate them. CEQA guideline section says 15064 says a direct physical change in the environment is a physical change in the environment which is caused by and immediately related to the project. Examples of direct physical changes to the environment are dust, noise, traffic of heavy equipment that would result from construction. Now, there are places where this is dealt with, but it's piecemeal and it's not comprehensive. And in many portions, the construction logistics plan, which is something that's way down the line here before the building permit, is referenced. This should be accomplished now. Otherwise, it's being deferred. That kind of deferred analysis is prohibited also. Now, I set forth an example on page 7 of my communication to you about this subterranean extraction of 26 feet or 2 floors of compacted dirt, which would be uncompacted. That's neither analyzed in the Farron Pierce traffic analysis or any other place. Why do I bring that up? Well, I think my math is correct, but basically there's going to be about 29,000 cubic yards of earth. If it goes by the standard dump truck size, which is about 20 cubic yards, it could be doubled to 40, there's something like 1,400 trips that are associated with that. Now, that's not analyzed in either Farron Pierce, that extent, or in the traffic demand management program, nor is there any relationship to the existing construction traffic that's going on associated with Cal Avenue, the lane reduction, or 261 South California, or even Park Boulevard. So that's the kind of environmental analysis that a cumulative analysis should bring forward. I quote from the Terry Schuckett letter. It's in your staff report that was given to you. I believe it's attachment G, and at least the way I printed it out, it's the first one. That's a personal observation by a businessman and property owner there, but it's common to almost anybody. I think I could say the things that he says, that there's traffic and circulation problems right now, and there certainly are parking problems right now. He also raises the issue of the California Avenue Assessment District and how it would be applied to this proposal. That's later. He also I think the land use planning project impacts aren't adequately analyzed. It was briefly referenced by someone else about you've got housing, but there's no indication of how that relates to the below market rate requirements or anything like that. The city's in litigation now in 2 cases on that precise issue. Regardless of how you feel about that, at least that should have been analyzed in the MND. It's very serious. There's testimony under penalty of perjury that's in a summary judgment motion currently scheduled for August 7th that deals with this. The testimony was from the planning. It says no nexus study has ever been accomplished with respect to the DMR obligation or the inclusionary housing element issue. Why is that relevant here? This, like many other projects, does have residential units, but there's no analysis as to their incremental impact on a cumulative basis. There should be, but why isn't there? Because there's never been a nexus study accomplished. I would respectfully suggest that's a deficiency that has to be addressed. Transportation and traffic, hazardous. This is, I'm sorry. This is it's been mentioned earlier in several contexts about there's inadequate information in this area of the MND. Specifically, I want to raise something about the Phase 1 analysis that's dated September 26, 2013. If you look at page 12 of that document, and I'm sorry I can't reference it in the 17 pages, but it says the following. It says, in accordance with ASTM standard practice, and it references, this port is presumed to be valid for a 6-month period. That lapsed in March. If the report is older than 6 months, the following information must be updated in order for the report to be valid. Regulatory review, site visit, interviews, specialized knowledge, and environmental liens research. That's not there. I've looked through everything. You can look through it, but there never was a subsequent analysis. So that means there's a lack of substantial evidence, to use the legal term, for the sufficiency of the hazards and hazardous materials portion of the MND. On transportation and traffic, I'm going back to some of the other things I've said, but I think I'd like to quote from the letter from Terry Schuchert, which is both in the conditions of approval and it's in the MND comments. California Avenue has a parking assessment district that allows property owners to use city lots in the area based on their assessment. The problem is our lots are full. There is no additional room for cars that a large new building will bring to the area like that proposed. He goes on further. From my observation and remarks, parking is difficult to find in our area. Proposed parking for 103 cars. The number provided is not even close to the number of spaces for that building size that would require to address the need of its tenants and workers. Stated plainly, there's an analysis that acknowledges the problem, but there are no solutions by way of mitigation set forth either in terms of traffic demand management or the Fair and Pierce traffic plan or actual mitigation conditions. The only one in traffic and mitigation is a mirror in the that's going to come up in the subterranean parking structure. But perhaps the most condemning in this area is the staff's acknowledgement of this issue in its deferral. One of the conditions of approval in the staff report, number 121, provides as follows. The project is within the California Avenue Parking Assessment District. The applicant shall meet with planning staff to determine what impact such parking regulations would have upon the development. That's after the fact, after the cow's out of the barn. That analysis should be accomplished right now. Terry Schuchert suggests it, staff acknowledges this. This is what's known as prohibited deferral. And I have citations for that in the document. Again, this is not a distraction. I'm going by evidence that's presented in the record. Now, we've already gone to the issue of construction of the building. One of the issues that comes up with the construction of the building of this type is it going to underpin or not? and that's critical. And the applicant's representatives have met with the homeowners, and I think I've accurately characterized it in this memorandum to say that they haven't said that they are not going to underpin. Why is that critical? That relates to the design of this building. They either have to go deeper, which isn't analyzed in this document, or they have to underpin. If they underpin, then it comes up prior to the issuance of a building permit. And again, the cow's out of the barn, the horses are out of the barn. What does the city say? The city says, we aren't going to issue a building permit until you get an underpinning agreement with whatever is reflected in your construction plans. That should be assessed now. You know, that's a permanent easement on the adjoining property. Normally, there are reciprocal agreements where money's exchanged. Sometimes it's a lot of money. But the point is, do you think that homeowners who have a problem with all the issues that affect their quiet enjoyment of their residences are going to engage in that kind of mitigation for this? Again, mitigation has to be feasible, capable of being carried out under CEQA. Finally, I'd like to go back to the enforcement issue a little bit. That's related to the mitigation monitoring plan. The experience on California Avenue and with the 260 building is as follows. There are quiet periods. People, the contractors engage in, you know, all kinds of activity during the quiet period. If you call the city, you know, the economic development director, he says, talk to the construction manager. The construction manager isn't always there, and when he's there, he says, so what? Now, granted, there are examples that go the other way, where there is cooperation. But the point is, experience right now indicates that enforcement's a problem. So it should be addressed in a substantive way that provides a real remedy with a roadmap so that if a problem comes up, they can be addressed. That's what a mitigation monitoring plan does. It's not even here. It's something to be adopted. Now, I would suggest in conclusion that there needs to be supplementation to this mitigated negative declaration. It needs to be recirculated. Again, respectfully, this is not a distraction. These are real things. I didn't create the Phase 1 environmental assessment, and Phase 1 doesn't have drilling. That's Phase 2. I didn't create the Phase 1 environmental assessment that's expired. I'm assuming that the applicant can do that. I'm assuming that there can be proper assessment of the air quality impacts consistent with the litigation. I'm assuming there can be some kind of cumulative analysis of the BMR issue. That's serious. I think it's very reasonable to say that unless the MND is recirculated, there can't be a recommendation for approval at this time. That would conclude my remarks. If there are questions, I'd attempt to answer them. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross, for your presentation. If there are any other speakers, we will entertain them at this time. Okay, no other speaker cards. You can stay where you are. That's fine. What I've done is I've asked Kara Silver, Deputy City Attorney for Land Use, to make some comments with regard to our purview with regard to the mitigated negative declaration and where that is going. And then what I will do is I will ask the consultant here if she has any follow-up that she wants to make with regard to members of the public and some of their comments here. So, Ms. Silver?
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Yes, Cara Silver, Senior Assistant City Attorney. Thank you to the public and thank you to Mr. Ross for his verbal comments and also for the letter that he provided to us yesterday. There are a lot of comments here, and I think it's important to explain what the ARB's role and purview is with respect to the mitigation monitoring plan and the mitigated negative declaration and the environmental review issues that have been raised by the public and by Mr. Ross. So the ARB is a recommending body. It is not the approval body, which means that the ARB does not actually approve the mitigated negative declaration, nor does it approve the project or the architectural review permit. Instead, what it does is it makes recommendations to the planning director, and the planning director then certifies the environmental review document and takes an action on the architectural review permit. Then if a public member or if the applicant disputes that the planning director's decision, the decision then can be approved to the city council, who then becomes the final decision-making authority on this project. So
No, I think you just misspoke. I just want to say the appeal, right? I think you said approved to the city council.
Appeal, yes. Thank you. So, so the ARB's purview, as you know, we have discussed in other items, is just a recommending body. When you make recommendations to the planning director or the city council on appeal, however, you should take into account the environmental document that was prepared for this project. That's why we attached it as an exhibit. You are accustomed to seeing these types of documents. Some projects that are smaller proceed on exemptions, and so there isn't a lengthy environmental analysis. But other major architectural review projects such as this do include a more lengthy, comprehensive environmental analysis, and that's what we have attached to the staff report. When you make your recommendations regarding architectural review, and when you consider the mitigated negative declaration, what you want to do is pay special attention to the portions of the mitigated negative declaration that relate to your specific review and purview. So you want to look at, since your purview relates to architectural review findings and the context-based findings in the zoning code, you want to pay special attention to the land use and the compatibility sections of the mitigated negative declaration. The environmental issues, you of course are not really the enforcement agency for that. Those issues are dealt with by the Regional Water Quality Control Board and by state agencies. The city likewise is not the enforcement agency with respect to the toxic plume in this area. I also wanted to, if we have some time, respond to some of the comments that Mr. Ross made at the hearing. First of all, he raised the question about the mitigation monitoring plan. Again, this body is not the agency that approves the mitigation monitoring plan. That is prepared by staff subsequently, taking into account the comments that it receives at this hearing, and then is approved by the planning director or the council on appeal. Mr. Ross raised the issue of baseline. I think there's some confusion with respect to baseline versus thresholds of significance. A baseline issue is, for CEQA purposes, you look at the existing baseline in effect at the time that the environmental review is commenced. For air quality, that means the air quality in the region at the time that the environmental review was commenced, and then you look at whether the addition of the project will affect the regional air quality conditions. Thresholds of significance, on the other hand, is the metric that is used to measure the increase in impacts or in air quality or air emissions. And so thresholds of significance have been legally challenged, but the existing baseline that was used in this environmental impact follows standard procedures. We used the significance thresholds that have been legally challenged. However, that challenge was based on a procedural issue, as Mr. Ross noted, and because the thresholds are more conservative, thus more protective of the environment than the earlier standards, we thought that it was a more conservative approach to use those standards, and so that's why that has been done. And that's what most cities are doing, even in light of this existing litigation. With respect to construction impacts and the truck trips, this is an issue that is handled through a construction mitigation plan. All projects go through this requirement. There's a requirement to submit a construction mitigation plan. It will specify the truck routes and the time for off-hauling the materials and what needs to be done to protect the soil so that it doesn't, get spilled and deposited in the streets and that type of thing. And the city has standard conditions that it imposes and carries through. With respect to the truck trips in particular, generally the city does not allow trucks to go through intersections during peak hours in order to mitigate traffic impacts. With respect to land use impacts and the BMR housing issue, this project will be required to pay BMR housing fees, I believe. It's subject to the commercial in lieu fee, or no?
It's for residential units. There's no BMR requirement.
What
rental.
about for the commercial component?
Oh yeah, there is the housing
Yes.
in lieu fee.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So the project will contain 4 housing units, which will help our jobs housing balance. And then with respect to the commercial component of the housing, the city has a requirement that it pay housing in lieu fees, and so that is how the housing impacts will be addressed for the commercial component. With respect to the hazardous materials, again, that's largely outside of the ARB's purview. However, the toxic plume in this area is very well known. It's very well documented. It's in the process of being mitigated. There are monitoring wells throughout the area. The documentation that was provided currently shows that the plume does not extend to this property. Nevertheless, it is close to the plume, and that does raise a concern, rightly so, for the neighbors and for the city and for the applicant. And the mitigated negative declaration talks about various procedures and protocols that should be followed in light of the plume. 2 more issues, and I will wrap up. The parking. The project is completely parked under the city's parking code. It complies with parking through 2 different mechanisms, one through the assessment district and second through on-site parking, of course, and there have been no environmental issues raised with respect to a completely parked project. Finally, the enforcement issue, again, those were some good issues raised by the public, and those will be certainly addressed in the mitigation monitoring plan that will be prepared by staff and approved by the planning director or the city council on appeal. And I will be happy to answer any further questions the board may have.
Before we go to the environmental consultant, I have a question for you. So from a procedural point of view, the deadline for the mitigated negative deck was July the 7th. We were supposed to have a hearing. This was originally supposed to be heard on July 3rd, which would have put the public testimony within that timeline or framework. We're now at, beyond that. How does that fit into the public testimony that we've received today with regard to the mitigated negative deck?
Yes. You are certainly entitled to consider all of the comments that the public has raised with respect to that testimony. You've also received some late comments in the form of a letter from Mr. Ross. You can consider that, and the city will continues to take those comments into effect, and will also take comments at the council hearing on appeal if it goes to that level as well.
Okay. Well, I guess my questioning is, if it was an EIR, any questions that are that meet the deadline on an EIR need to be in the report and addressed.
I see. Yes.
Okay.
So this is a mitigated negative declaration, and so there is not a legal requirement for the city to respond in writing to comments received by the public. That being said, the city's practice in certainly with respect to major projects that have caused a lot of public concern and input, the city does respond to comments, and the consultant has prepared a response to the comments that it received as of the date of the response. The consultant's response is in the staff report, and the consultant is also here to answer any additional verbal comments that have been raised by the community.
Okay, and then one last comment is, or question. Mr. Ross in his presentation had begun to describe the difference between an EIR, a mitigated negative deck, and a
exemption.
Yeah. Can you please just sort of go through for the public so they understand through the city attorney what the differences are between those three documents?
Absolutely. So there are three different levels of environmental review. The sort of lowest level of environmental review is called an exemption, and that applies to projects that really don't have an environmental impact, and so they are considered exempt as a matter of state law because it's very clear that there won't be an environmental impact. Examples of those types of projects are typically single-family homes, very small infill-type projects that don't have significant traffic or other types of environmental impacts. The second level of environmental review is what we call a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration. And that involves a higher level of review. There are technical studies that are prepared. There's a traffic study that's typically prepared. There's, in this case, there is a hazardous materials study that's typically prepared. And sometimes, if, for instance, if there's a historic structure that's going to be impacted, there's a historic structure study that's prepared, other types of studies. And the city's consultant then takes all of those studies and determines whether there are any impacts that can that are going to be created by the project that cannot be addressed through standard project mitigations. Most project impacts can be addressed through conditions of approval and mitigations that are then imposed on the project. So you see with this project, there were a series of, 100 or so conditions, and those conditions in part are designed to mitigate the traffic impacts of the project, the parking impacts, the hazardous material impacts, those types of issues that could potentially have environmental consequences. Then the third level of environmental review is called an environmental impact report. And environmental impact reports are typically prepared for projects that have impacts that in fact cannot be mitigated. Some of the impacts can be mitigated, but there might be one or two impacts that cannot be mitigated, and which then would require a statement of overriding considerations from the City Council or the approving body.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Does the environmental consultant wish to follow up and make any other statements? If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Sure. I'm Catherine Watt. I'm a senior project manager with DUDEC, and we are the city's environmental consultant for the project. I think that the city attorney did a great job of responding to most of the issues. I only saw 3 other issues looking through my notes that I wanted to speak to, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So the first was on tree survivability. A few folks have questioned different aspects of the proposed landscaping plan, and I wanted to note that part of the mitigation requirements do include monitoring of the tree's survivability for a period of years, and there are provisions for what to do in case a tree does not survive. The second issue was the concern about toxics being emitted during the construction process, both from the groundwater plume contamination, contaminants that might be in the soil, and then asbestos and lead that might be in the existing building. And for all of those issues, there are mitigation measures included in the report that specify how those materials should be handled, or reference the applicable state and federal requirements that set out pretty specific and detailed guidelines for how to address those issues to ensure that there aren't health hazards that are created during the construction process. And then the final issue that I wanted to note was the concern about noise from the future, from the rooftop mechanical equipment, and there are specific city standards that the project must meet. And it's a simple, well, it might not be simple, but it's an engineering exercise, and there are certainly mechanical solutions to make sure that those standards can be attained. So those were the only 3 issues that I wanted to speak to.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're almost at 2 hours on this hearing. What we're going to do is the following. We're going to take a 5-minute break so everybody can relax a little bit and go to the restroom if they need to. And then we will reconvene the hearing again, and we will return to the board. For the board, we'll do a series of 1 round of questions, and then followed up by questions and comments. And maybe there will be a motion. We'll see. And then we will have the applicant make a 5-minute presentation before we take any action today. So with that, let's just take a 5-minute break, and that will put us at exactly 2 hours, and we'll reconvene. Thank you. your seat. We're going to reconvene here. Okay, if everybody could please take your seat. Okay, we're going to begin again. Just to refresh everybody, we're closing the public hearing. We're going to return to the board for a round of questions, and then we'll follow up with questions and comments. Hopefully there'll be a motion, and before we take action on the motion, we will have the applicant make a 5-minute closing remarks addressing anything they want. So with that, I will begin with Board Member Malone Pritchard, and you have a soft 5 minutes.
Which I will not use. I do not have any further questions. I will have comments later.
Okay. Vice Chair Pop?
I was wondering if the applicant had a material board that we could pass around and take a look at.
Okay. So
one quick note on that. The materials board is from our preliminary hearing. We have subsequently, in redesigning or adding to the design of the Sherman facade, selected a limestone that we'd like to use, the column covers and the tiling over by the garage area, so that's here to supplement.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Okay. Board Member Guyer?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Board Member Liu?
I have a question for the applicant about lighting. So you're showing soffit lighting, and I was wondering about that. Is that the third floor, or is that sort of the lower levels? I know you have a lot of different recesses on the on your building.
I think that you're talking about at the pedestrian level. Is that fair to say?
I'm actually not sure. I'm seeing on your sheet LT00, I'm seeing a photo of a lighted soffit, and I'm not sure where.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
is the uplight.
I think it'd be helpful just to go to that view, just so I can kind of point out.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it. Yeah, I'll look at it in a minute.
Let's see here. So I'm just gonna have to scan through. Okay, this is a well. Actually, let's go more towards the end. Okay, I think it's probably a pretty good view. So we have some soffit lighting in a couple of locations. I'll show this view and I'll go back to one other. So the idea here on the underside of this is that we provide a soft amount of light position at the parapet level, well, beneath the parapet level, so concealed from view of street, to highlight the underside of that in a soft and subtle way in the evening times. And the sidewalk, keep going here. Sorry, so many slides. So you'll see here that at the street level as well, underneath this canopy, we have some stripped down lighting. Throws light out into the public realm, but also, I mean, it doesn't escape past the property line, obviously, but comes down to sort of highlight the base of the building as well. Does that make sense?
It does, and I have a question. You had another project that came to the board not too long ago, and they were saying that there are restrictions on soffit lighting because of Title 24, our California energy regulations, and I was wondering if that had been sort of factored in your design.
So I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a kind of a blanket answer on that. So the lighting engineer that we're working with is obviously conversant in Title 24, and specifically those changes that sort of roll through in July 1. These fixtures are recommended by the consultant in order to take into account those issues.
Okay.
So that they're in there is that they meet
They've
that
been-
standard.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay, and then I had another question for you. Oh, I will wait for the next round of comments.
Okay.
Okay, I have just a couple of questions, one for staff. With regard to hours of operation on the exterior decks, that relates to only the commercial floors, correct? Not the residential floors.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and what about police with regard to hours of operation? If there's noise, can the adjacent property owners simply call the police and let them know that it's outside the hours, and will the police respond?
They can call the police when outside of normal, code enforcement hours. It would be incumbent on code enforcement to work with the building owner to enforce that ultimately. The police department, as you've heard, may be not timely in terms of responding to something like that, but we can certainly be aware whenever the police is called. Then it would generate a report, and so we'd have a history and an understanding of an issue that might be existing there that we can then follow up with code enforcement to resolve.
I seem to remember that at a similar location, Antonio's Nut House had some noise issues with regard to the Birch Court residents, and that had come before Planning and Transportation Commission. Is that correct? Can you sort of go through how that was handled?
Well, that was with the conditional use permit for the service of alcohol, so it's a different level of review, and definitely code enforcement did enforce on the conditions of approval related to that use to ensure that they resolved it.
Okay, so a similar matter has been resolved in an appropriate way. Okay.
And even in that instance, I know the code enforcement worked late hours to make observations of what was occurring at that business, and that could also be something that would happen here if it was noted that things were happening after normal business hours. There could be opportunities to observe that and take the appropriate action.
Okay. I have a question for the applicant. Can you just basically go through your building section and the difference between the heights, the floor-to-floor heights of the previous proposal versus the current proposal?
Oh, gotta go for this one. Okay. I'm on? Okay. So previously, we had top of parapet measured at 50 feet. In order to be able to achieve that, we were getting to 16-foot floor-to-floors, equally spaced between all three floors, and the assumption is we'd have a two-foot parapet. We have decreased that floor-to-floor 1 feet 4 inches to 14.8. This will be a steel frame building, as you know, so measurement to the underside of deck will be 14 feet clear because of the spans, because of the relatively column-free environment per se in the office floors, relatively deep beams. These will be somewhere in the order of W30 to W36s. So after we put mechanical systems to run underneath those beams, likely if a tenant chooses a lay-in ceiling, we're going to end up with somewhere around a 10-foot ceiling. Okay, so we've also thought a little bit more about how we would slope the insulation for positive drainage on the roof, starting at the perimeter away, and decrease the height of that parapet in addition to kind of sculpting the detail at that kind of the perimeter overhang. So reducing it, just specifically answering that question, from 16 feet to 14.8, and then reducing the size of the parapet to get the overall 4 foot 7 inch decrease in height. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What about using open web steel,
So for the secondary structural members, that's possible. This is going to be a moment frame structural system, so there's going to be a series of frames which are going to be welded to provide lateral resistivity, which are likely going to be W sections and not going to be open web sections. But the secondary members that form the structural support for the floors hasn't really been finalized yet. But there's been enough conversation with the structural engineer to kind of dictate what kind of depths that we're going to ultimately be looking at, although not exact tonnages specified at this stage.
Okay, great. And then going back to staff, I'd like to talk a little bit about transportation demand management. So in this proposal, they have 2 floors of underground parking, and then the rest of any additional parking that they would need would be waived because of parking. Would there be any parking reductions? Is what I'm looking at here.
There are no parking reductions. The project is fully parked.
Okay.
Code.
And then with regard to transportation demand management program, how would that be handled?
When you say handled, what are you referring to?
Well, how is it typically done? What do we require of a applicant for transportation demand management?
The programs vary widely. It is not a required mitigation, so it's not like there's going to be a mitigation monitoring issue. But many of the options are like go passes would be provided to staff. This is very close to the train station, so go passes would provide an option for people to not drive to work. That's kind of one of the primary ways, but there's multiple other programs like setting up individuals to do a carpool program within the office to encourage employees to carpool together to reduce auto usage. Again, this isn't a required TDM plan, so off the top of my head, I don't recall all the measures. The applicant might be able to speak more concisely about what it was that they did propose, but we weren't relying on the TDM plan to achieve any code compliance with the parking. The project is fully parked.
Okay. Maybe the applicant wants to describe what the transportation demand management program will be and how that will be handled. Identify yourself.
Dan Minkoff, I'm the applicant. We found with other buildings that transportation demand management plans are useful to tenants, not only to neighbors in the neighborhood. And the reason we're doing this voluntarily, not required by the city, is we feel like it's a good thing to do that not only reduces the parking requirement of the building and then anything may not fit in the building, but it also makes things better for tenants. So I don't know every word of the lengthy the TDM plan. As Russ is saying, typically we use eco passes, guaranteed ride home, carpool parking. We have above required bicycle parking, both exterior on grade as well as interior and in different classes of lockers. So some people have fancier bikes. They like them in fancier lockers for security reasons. Also showers, so someone can go and take a shower after they ride to work, and elements like that. We also usually work with a TDM coordinator who then works with the tenants' different human resources management teams to help implement that within the tenant community. And depending on which elements are in the TDM plan from time to time, parts of it would be required by leases.
The vice chair forgot to time me, so I'm going to cede my time and come back on another round. Does board member Malone Pritchard, you wanted to, you might have some questions or some additional, you want to make some comments?
You want to start the comment period?
No, let's just, yeah.
Okay, I believe there'll all be comments at this point. I appreciate the changes you've made in massing and detailing. It's a much more handsome project and a better scale than it was before. Also very happy to see the improvements you made to the sidewalk by taking away the DEE and providing a wider sidewalk and a lot of pedestrian amenities. I was concerned about visual privacy. Looking at the sections, it seems to me that section AA is against a solid wall, so I don't have any issue with what happens there. And section BB is an area where your building is directly across from corridors, not private living spaces. And section CC, what we discussed about the trees growing up, I do feel strongly that we'll need to address how to maintain privacy until the trees are big enough, and you have suggested a film that would be acceptable to me. The shading on the existing building, I think you've done a good job of sort of balancing the owner's concerns with the owners of the building next door obviously would prefer no changes at all. But unfortunately, the owner of this project has property rights and has the right to do some development. So our balancing act here is really to look at what's reasonable to allow him to do and what sort of mitigations do we have to impose on him so that it isn't too much of a burden on the neighboring properties. So having said that, I think the study you've done with the shading by stepping back the building and by lowering its height is an acceptable approach. I had a couple of sort of comments on findings, actually. We can go to the architectural review findings, which is attachment A. Finding number 2 is that the design is compatible with the immediate environment of the site. And in the 3rd and 4th lines, it states that the project is attempting to be responsive. I would say that this project actually is being responsive to the external constraints. And I would add to that the design has taken into consideration the window locations on the adjacent property and has taken into consideration the shading impact on the adjacent building, and that the project's massing responds to the fact that there is a building next door. And then also had a comment in the comprehensive plan table. Which is attachment E. So a policy T1 is to make land use decisions that encourage walking, bicycling, and public transit use. And the staff comment is that the proposal does little to encourage alternate means of transportation. I think in light of the fact that they are now proposing a TDM program, we need to modify that to state that they are providing a TDM program which will encourage alternate means. And that's all I have at this time.
Vice Chair Pop.
In terms of site organization, I think you've done a very appropriate job here. You know, I think with all of the available options and all of the choices you might make, this is a very well thought out design, and I'm appreciative of the way you've pulled the building away from the adjacent neighbors. I'll just echo the comments made by Board Member Mullen Pritchard. You know, property owners have the right to develop their property, and I actually respect the fact that you're not seeking the maximum envelope. You know, it's clear that you're at the maximum FAR for the project, and that's fine, but you've done that in a way that pulls the building away from and respects the other buildings adjacent to it. You know, I still feel like the building's taller than it needs to be. I would love to see you investigate other structural systems that allow you to integrate the mechanical with the structural and bring those floor-to-floor heights down. You know, it seems to me that 40-foot height is pretty achievable here versus the 44, but I appreciate that you've made the changes that you've made already, and I do think that the project is better for that, and that the overall horizontality and the aesthetic of the building is improved as a result of that. But you know, I'd like you to consider pushing down a little bit more and working on that a little bit more. A 3-story building in 44 feet still seems bigger than it needs to be, and when you compare that directly to the 4-story residential building that it's adjacent to, you know, it's clear that there are other ways to do this. Thank you for bringing the materials that you have. I have to say, I think it's a handsome palette, a very thoughtful palette of materials, and the placement on the building, the way you've used the materials seems very successful to me, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing this building as part of the fabric of that area as a result of that. The only real comment I have is about the landscape at this point, and I am quite concerned about the privacy issues between the two buildings. You know, while you know, everyone should expect that whatever is around them is going to get built up at some point, and you know, could be they could see change. You know, that the view that they have to the sky could go away. That the you know, the noise and the intensity of development around them is relative to the zoning that you're adjacent to, and as you're purchasing homes and moving into properties, I hope everyone thinks about that a little bit. But I am concerned about this area where there won't be trees for a while, and I appreciate the idea of film on the windows, but I don't think that that's going to be very successful in terms of managing privacy. You're still going to want to be able to see out your windows, and they're going to want to be able to see out their windows. And I think what I would ask is for you to potentially either reconsider the type of species that you're placing in that area, so it's something that's going to mature and get to a height and a density that will promote filtering of views and increasing privacy more rapidly, or just buy more mature trees, invest in something that's quite a bit larger and is immediately successful at managing the privacy concerns that the neighbors have spoken of. I think that that will go a long way towards alleviating people's concerns here, and you know, I agree with the comments made by Board Member Liu about the amount of space needed for the roots to grow and the success of the trees. I am quite concerned about the trees around this property and their likely ability to survive this construction process. It seems very unlikely to me that you'll be successful at that, but hopefully you'll make some Herculean effort toward that, and we'll have some good result. But overall, I have to say I'm quite pleased with this project, and the board is also often asked to evaluate projects that ask for exceptions, exceed the limits, go beyond in one way or another, and the public should be very aware, I think, of an applicant who comes in and says, I'm not looking for anything extra here. I'm meeting all the requirements. I'm within the zoning envelope, and I've tried to be respectful of the context that I'm within. And I think that that is that's an important thing for all of us to recognize, and I want to just note my appreciation for that, and thank you for bringing a nice project to us.
Okay, Board Member Guyer.
Thank you. Actually, I'm quite torn with this project in the sense that I think some of the modifications that have been made based on what we talked about last time, meaning the sidewalk, some of the other things, are a great improvement. The other part of that is that just because zoning says you can build a certain size building on a particular property doesn't mean that it's the appropriate thing to do for that particular property. And things that bothered me the first go-around, such as, the proverbial make the building look a little smaller by stepping the third floor back, that's all fine and dandy, but especially if you look at the Sherman side, you've stepped the third floor back, but that massive eyebrow hasn't changed at all. And from a visual standpoint, that to me, that building doesn't look any smaller than it did on the last go-around, whether you could step that third floor back 10 feet and it would still look the same size. Had that eyebrow been removed, for instance, then maybe I'd say, yes, you definitely made a concerted effort to make that building look like, a much smaller building. Things such as I brought up last time, do you really need a 14-foot, 8-inch floor-to-floor for a residential unit? I mean, you know, that's maybe fine for some loft in San Francisco, but here, there's no need that you can't make those two separate and bring it down to a normal, you know, 10-foot floor to floor, 11-foot floor to floor. So it brings the whole scale of that area down. It, like I said, the finishes are very nice, you know, that sort of thing. But some of the main things that you can't, or I should say that in my mind needed to be addressed by actually changing the shape of the building haven't been done. I don't like the idea of hoping that, you know, I plant tree X there because in 5 years it'll be 15 feet high or 30 feet high. What if the thing gets some sort of a disease in 2 years and they have to tear it down? And you and I both know they're not going to replace the tree. So it's one of these things that I think the architecture should handle the screening, not the landscaping. I've never liked an excuse of saying, well, it's an ugly building, so we'll just plant a whole lot of trees in front of it, or whatever the case is, whether it's an ugly building or I don't want to see the building or I don't want them to see me. I don't like the idea of having to use landscaping for, you know, that buffer. Because landscaping has a tendency to disappear, and it's not controllable. Just because we make a decision here doesn't mean that in 5 years that's going to be enforced. I mean, we heard that as far as like the noise ordinance. I mean, yeah, the cop's going to go, yeah, right, I've got to patrol all of Palo Alto for violence, and here they're expecting me to worry about a noise issue. It's just not going to happen. I don't see that at all. Things such as the rooftop garden, which I think is great. I like that whole concept. I love that it's been you know, coming more and more. And I understand where you placed it is nice so you can overlook the park, but it also overlooks the neighbors. So maybe had you thought, if I put it on the opposite side where it abuts Sherman, okay, I'm looking at a parking lot, but if you're up there just to have a couple of drinks or whatever, you're not worried about leaning over the balcony looking at the landscape. You know, it's that sort of thing that would also set the building back again, and it wouldn't make it so that, you know, invariably you're standing there with a drink looking over the balcony into somebody's bedroom. The problem with the existing condos is quite often if you develop, you know, condos next to each other, the light alley, whatever you want to call it, the alley in between, quite often is not the main view for the residents. It's their bathroom window or a second bedroom where their living room, you know, goes out somewhere else. In this particular case, the way I've seen it when I worked by there, a lot of those people, that's their main living room window that faces out into this 12-foot, you know, alleyway, if you want to call it, now with this massive building in front of it. So I think you did a heck of a job. I mean, I'm very pleased with what it is, but I'm having a hard time being able to support it.
Thank you very much.
With regard to specific comments or questions that you have, should I wait until the end to address those?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that's going to be your time. Okay. Board Member Liu?
Actually, I have some questions for the architect and landscape architect. Okay, so there are, I think in the plans you're showing a lot of things like fences and transformer screening and stuff, and like good neighbor fences, but we don't have any of the details, I think, in the packet. And so I was wondering, I just have if you could address them. It's like, what do you envision the neighboring fence to be? What are you thinking about for the transformer screen? That's like the new one. And then also, is there anything new screening being provided for the existing transformer on Ash Street? And then also, does the garage have a gate and like sometimes they have an alarm for pedestrians, like when the cars are exiting the ramp? And so I was wondering what happens in that vicinity, like right at the edge of the sidewalk.
Okay, so in terms, is this on? Sorry. So what's there now? I'm just going to go to the fence question first, if that's okay. So what's there now? You know, a little bit of an older, slightly dilapidated wood fence. We have a certain level of flexibility on the way we design that fence, because it is directly adjacent and viewable and experienced by the neighbors. So in a certain way, we want to build that fence in a way that's pleasing. I think it's a wood fence. I think it's a good neighbor fence. Again, we've talked about it being a little higher than what's there now, so that the folks that are in the office looking back towards Birch Court to have ground floor windows concealed completely from view. So it's a fence that will be newer, fresher, but similar in character to what's there, because it feels like, with the landscape quality and the nature and scale of it, it seems like that's the right kind of fence to design. Does that help? As it relates to the location of, let me just find a plan here real fast somewhere. This is good enough. You're talking specifically about the transformer here in terms of screening. You also have a separate question about the one on Ash. So the transformer location is the preferred location for utilities. That's where they're telling us we have to put it. So our desire is to extend that privacy fence out to the sidewalk, so that from the standpoint of the public environment and the neighbors themselves, that's concealed behind the neighbor fence we'll build, right? So that aesthetic of that fence will continue out, and we've talked about the access of that space should utilities need it in the future, but the idea is to use that fence to screen the transformer. On Ash, these two transformers that are here, it's a little bit of a different animal, because those transformers, which are relatively small but noticeable, don't actually serve our project. They serve other blocks and other buildings in the neighborhood. So we have a little bit of a limited ability to just, kind of deal with those. It would be awesome if they weren't there, but that's not really our call. In terms of screening, we've and Todd can talk about this a little bit further, but we're doing the best job we can to keep access out of the trash room to the curb, so a functional space that we need around it, but also planting it in such a way that at least it makes the edges of those things and how they relate to the sidewalk and the relatively substantial width from curb to building in that section as reasonable as possible, certainly better than what's there currently in terms of the way they look. But again, we're kind of having to accept those. The garage gate, yeah. The idea there would be a garage gate. I think that the details of which, whether that's, I think that's going to remain open during business hours. There would likely be some monitoring alarm for pedestrian and cross traffic for cars for safety reasons. I'm not sure if that's in the specific conditions of approval, but I think it's reasonable practice, and I'm assuming that that's what would be implemented. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Should we do? How are we doing on time? And then I will wait for the next round.
I have a couple of more questions. Regarding the ground floor there, is there a requirement that it be ground floor retail, or could that be converted to office space?
There's no ground floor retail requirement in this location.
Okay. And then with regard to, again, the transportation demand management program, so would the person who's leasing the space provide transit passes, or would you, as part of the rent, encourage people to take public, or?
It would go one of two ways. Either way, it would be a requirement that the landlord is putting in. We've had buildings where we say, usually on multi-tenant buildings, we say this is part of the building program, and we're providing this as a perk of leasing the building. And there's other times, and usually in single-tenant buildings, where they have a bigger tenants with more human resource staff, where they're more knowledgeable about the number of employees that they have in the location, where we say, as a requirement of the lease, you need to provide this. So
okay. Let me tell you where I'm going with this, okay? And it's really not mentioned in the mitigated negative deck, but it has a direct impact on the overall, how shall we say, square footage. Okay. It used to be that you figure 100, 150 square feet per person, but today's standards are really different. When you get into some of the new high-tech incubators, they're actually putting people in office spaces that are far smaller than that. It's basically.
That's it, just like that. Like this, there's 5 of us.
It's elbow to elbow, okay? And, I don't have a problem with that from an overall work point of view. That's the new standard, okay? But that hasn't been recognized from a planning point of view. So they're still basing the parking count on old square footages for traditional offices, open office plan. But the new standard really comes down to working shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow with another group of people on the other side. So they're really benches that we're talking about here. So we are going to run out of parking space very quickly. And so without a transportation demand management program and sort of subsidy for public transit, we are going to have a parking problem. And so maybe you might want to address that a little bit here.
Is your question on payment or logistics or?
It's a little bit of both.
A little bit of both.
How are we gonna make this work? We are in the pedestrian transit overlay district. Okay, you could make use of that standard, so to speak. But the truth be told, that what you're building is allowed under the current guidelines, and so it's sort of a gray area. How are we going to make it so that the residents in that neighborhood are not inundated with vehicle traffic beyond the on-site parking?
I think that's just a robust use of a TDM plan. I think the TDM plan we have is one of the more aggressive ones. Would you look for it to be in the conditions of approval? Is that where you're going with this, Lee?
Well, I don't.
I wouldn't have a problem with that.
I have news for you. Okay?
Yeah.
I don't have anything to say with regard to parking.
Mm-hmm.
All the parking's on site. It's underground, and it meets the requirements. Okay, but this is an issue, and
let me talk about TDM plans from a different standpoint. It's not just good for neighbors; it's also good for tenants and landlords. It is not in my favor as a landlord to have a building where there are more people. We want to do whatever we can as landlords that have happy tenants, and providing these incentives, EcoPass, bicycle parking, guaranteed ride home, all these things are in my best interest as well, and that's why we do TDM plans. And we think they're important. And when we talk about lease negotiations with tenants, we say this is going to be part of the deal with this building.
Staff, have anything you want to add to that? I'm sorry that I'm sort of coming around this from the back side of the whole thing. Does the environmental consultant have anything to say with regard to this? I mean, this is the permitted parking count. It's not a magna. You can just talk.
So I mean there is research and data available. I don't have it at my fingertips, but there are there is research that supports the use of TDM, and demonstrates that these plans do have an effect on the trip generation, and they are effective. I'm not familiar with the details of the proposed plan, since it's not required under the environmental review.
I just want to make one other comment here. If you had ground floor retail, this would not be an issue, because the ground floor retail, meets that standard in terms of the parking count. Okay, it's a blended rate, but with the ground floor potentially being used as office space, I think it begins to tip the balance. So I see this as a concern or an issue. It's outside the purview of the Architectural Review Board, but I do believe it's within the purview of what we're doing in terms of the mitigated negative declaration. So I just wanted to make sure that we're there.
I just wanted to clarify, it's really not an issue with the MND, since there have been no traffic and parking impacts identified. So it's not something that the MND would address, and there's been no impact identified. One other thing to consider is that it's not a given that they're going to pack people into the building. It really depends on the tenant. If this is a law firm or something like that, they don't pack their employees and they have very spacious offices and are not likely to generate that kind of parking demand. But if it were some kind of incubator type tech firm, then yes, that may be the case. And so we think it's actually great that there is a TDM plan as part of the project, that they will do that. That it's we can certainly add it as a condition of approval. The applicant said that they're willing to do that, but it's our understanding that it's already a component of the application. So we understand that they are going to work with whoever their tenant is to ensure that they have adequate parking based on not only providing the 103 parking spaces, but also implementing the TDM as appropriate to meet the needs of whichever tenant they end up getting in the building.
Just to follow on as far as CEQA impacts, parking is not determined as a CEQA impact. Circulation, seeking parking, adding to trips locally could be seen as an impact. But in this case, I think having the TDM, while not a requirement to meet the parking spaces, having a TDM would help with that circulating around looking for a parking space. So to that extent, I think if the applicant is so willing to add a condition of approval, again, not to state that it's a mitigation of an impact because that has not been identified, but certainly would help to, control that behavior.
Deputy City Attorney.
Yes, I think that's fine, that staff will can incorporate that as a condition of approval given that the applicant is amenable to it. I'm still struggling as to whether that is really within the ARB's purview, however, but it seems like it's a moot issue as both staff and applicant agree.
Great, thank you very much. We'll go to another round and hopefully there'll be some sort of motion here. Board Member Malone Pritchard.
I have no further comments. I would like to put a motion on the table that the ARB recommend approval of the project to the director. That would incorporate the findings as modified and the mitigated negative declaration and the modifications to the comprehensive plan compliance table. And I'd also note that the conditions of approval currently include mitigations from the mitigated negative declaration.
Do I have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Vice Chair Pop, would you like to speak to your second? Okay.
I have other comments.
Okay. Board Member Malone Pritchard, do you want to address your motion or speak to that at all?
I believe that my comments beforehand spoke to the motion. I think it is a well-designed project.
Okay.
Good balance.
Vice Chair Pop.
I only wanted to react to a comment that came up in the course of conversation regarding the garage entry. And while I'm concerned about public safety and want to make sure that people are traversing that garage opening in a safe manner, I would not want to see an alarm put there that buzzes every time a car comes in and out, because I think that would be awful for the neighborhood to have that going off every time there's a vehicle trip. So I think lights flashing are great. I think making sure that you have enough sight lines so that you can pause before you pull into the pedestrian way is important. I think making sure that there's enough clearance around for pedestrians so they can see if there's a car coming is important. But something that is audible would not be my first choice. I understand that there are concerns about people who have the inability to see the flashing lights, but I just am concerned beyond that the noise generated by that would be problematic, and so I would not encourage that.
Board Member Guyer. Do you have any comments or?
I don't have any comments. I'm fine.
Okay. Board Member Liu.
So I just wanted to thank the applicant. I think the drawing set was great. It was very clear, and all the information was, was generally very easy to find. And I do think that you made substantial improvements to the project since the last time we saw it. I think there are a couple the cross sections and showing the that show the third floor setback facing building 2. I think was substantial. I do understand that the neighbors in building 3 still have issues. I think generally my take on it is that it is complying with the zoning ordinance. I looked through it really carefully. The zoning ordinance, I don't necessarily agree with everything in it, but it does allow, it seems kind of like a strange trade-off. It allows the extra height going up to 50 feet if residential is added. But it doesn't really, the zoning ordinance doesn't really ask for a lot of residential to be added. And then it also throws in a little thing that if you put in 4 units or less, then it can come to the ARB and it doesn't have to go to the Planning Commission and the City Council. If it's more than 4 units, then it has to go through Site and Design Review, which is Planning, Transportation Commission, and City Council, which is pretty onerous, I think. And so, I mean, I'm not surprised that only 4 units are coming in this particular project, and I think that's sort of unfortunate. I think we have, there's a huge housing need, and I would rather see more housing units than fewer, but I understand that that's the applicant's choice. I think that your design of putting the housing facing the park is a really good one. I would ideally like to see it lower. I understand that for seismic reasons that you might want all the floors to tie together. I mean, normally I would put it in, would like to have it lower. I think that that's like one of the biggest improvements in the project. And then on the downside is that it moves the ramp over towards like building 3. But I think that's, of the choices, like that's the better decision. And I think one of the residents asked about why can't the driveway be in the middle of the building. And the hard thing is that there's the ramp that always sort of, you can't just sort of plop it down in the middle of the building. The building on Park Avenue does have a driveway right in the middle of the project. And that's actually, but it's a huge, that building takes up like an entire city block. And actually by our own zoning ordinance that driveway should be on the side street. It shouldn't actually be on Park, but it got approved that way. I think my main concerns are really kind of like details. So it's just like the landscape screening of the trees. It seems that you're removing so many trees that it's going to take a long time for new trees to grow and screen the building. Like fences, as I mentioned, transformer screen. The uplighting on the soffit, I think our performance guidelines sort of discourage uplighting, and so I think I'm not going to support that. Although, like aesthetically, I like it, but our zoning really sort of dictates that all lights go, be cast downward. So I can't support that. I did mention the garage alarm because I do know people who live in mixed-use buildings, and I do know that the noise is an issue, especially for people who live right above the garage entrance. And so I am concerned about that, and also the way the garage gate looks. And then I think generally, though, like even though I can support the project in concept, I think I would like it to be like slightly smaller. So like there are just a couple places where like you have like 5 feet between the park and your residential units, which seems really small to me. And then it looks like you're projecting in like a stoop or whatnot, and that's the main entrance for the 2 units, right? Is along that walkway. And so if you've got that, like you can't even fit any landscaping in there. It seems like you have like 25-foot driveway aisles, and I think you can go down. I think our minimum right is 24 for an island. Is it staff? Is it 25? I think I forgot exactly, but I thought that you could. I was thinking of making the building like maybe like 2 feet smaller and taking it out of the driveway aisles. To get more room for landscaping. I think some of the neighbors were complaining about the open space, the office open space facing building 3, and I think I'm against that. I think our zoning, our zoning ordinance does encourage outdoor spaces. It does sort of point that they sort of suggest that they be on the main facades of the building to sort of help activate the street. And I think you're putting it in like a fairly private place facing a residential building. So I think I cannot support that. And I think that's all that I think that's all that I have at this time. I think I can't support the motion just as mentioned.
Do you have a friendly amendment?
Well, why don't we wait to see? Do you have an? I'll wait to see what your comments are, and then we can discuss the amendments.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank the applicant as well as the members of the public. Both your testimony is very important today in terms of reaching our conclusions. I also want to thank Mr. Ross for your presentation. That was particularly helpful. I want to begin by saying that when I first moved to Palo Alto, I actually looked at Birch Court as well as Palo Alto Central as potential places to live, and I ultimately settled on downtown North, which is just as problematic. But I understand your issues and concerns. The property that's there, we have not changed the underlying zoning. In fact, the underlying zoning remains, and it's always been there in place. And so the development regulations that we're following here are being followed, and I appreciate the applicant removing the DEE. While it was seductive, it was probably not appropriate, and I'm glad that they saw wisdom to remove that. In addition to that, when we did go through a preliminary hearing, the applicant, we did convey to the applicant a number of issues, and one of them happened to be building height and massing, as well as stepping bounce certain areas of the building. And the applicant did listen to us. So a lot of what has been incorporated into this proposal today is really feedback that the applicant had received from ourselves as well as members of the community. It's very sad that that a building has to go on this site and replace it, what's currently there. But the truth of the matter is that we're really under a tremendous amount of pressure to replace existing buildings in a way that reduce our carbon footprint. And this is a moral responsibility as well as a legislative responsibility that we have, that simply by taking older buildings and buildings do pollute, that create more carbon, and creating new buildings that generate the same or less carbon is where we're going in the state of California. So by adding density or height or mass or more usability of this piece of property and reducing the carbon footprint, we're actually doing something positive for the environment. Now, I know it sounds like a convoluted way. It says it's like spending money to save money, But there is ample documentation and backup to support this, and it's something that architects are struggling with, not just in California, but all over the world. So it's a very important issue. Our job here as the Architectural Review Board is to review the current proposal for its compatibility in not just the immediately adjacent property, but also within the California Avenue district. And so we've done that, and it is really a guiding. It's important that the proposal that comes forward not just address the single parcel, but also set certain standards for the direction that this neighborhood could possibly be going in. I think what's important to this, to the success of this proposal is the transportation demand management program. And by that, what I mean is that offices are being used differently today than they have in the past. And as Staff Member Reich had mentioned, it could very well be a law office, but it could also be a high-tech startup or incubator, which is my inclination. And so just as we have looked at updating the zoning ordinance, I think it's important that staff begin to look at new standards for office space, commercial office space, because the old standards are not being followed and they're being broken. Now, they do have something that can be followed to monitor this and to make sure that the standards are not broken. That is the building code. That following the building code, when you have a certain use or occupancy, that it must, that it cannot exceed the number of occupants in the building. So if in the future it does wind up being elbow to elbow people and it exceeds the maximum occupancy for public safety and exiting from the building department does have the ability to come down on that and enforce that, and could actually shut down the building. But what I would ask staff to do, and I think that this is more of a bookkeeping issue than anything, is that whoever the tenants are that move into this space, they do have to file for a certificate of occupancy. And with the certificate of occupancy, it would be incumbent that the tenant provide a floor plan of how furniture, desks, offices are going to be laid out. And that if in fact it exceeds the occupant load for building, then in fact that the certificate of occupancy is not issued. So that's sort of the way I think that this can be handled and done in a ministerial way as opposed to a discretionary way. So with that, we have a motion, we have a second, we have some follow-up comments and perhaps some friendly amendments, and then we will have the applicant make their closing remarks before we take action. So, Board Member Malone-Pritchard, do you have anything else you wish to add?
Yes, I'd like to make a friendly amendment to my own motion.
Okay.
I would like to add several items that would come back for subcommittee review. The first one would be consider means to address the second floor view from the offices into the residential, and several different options were listed. I don't want to limit it to those options. I'd like the applicant to come back with a good proposal for how to limit that view until the trees are mature enough to do it themselves. I would like them to bring back fence details. Like to specify that there's no audible alarm on the parking garage exit. Would like to see details of the transformer screening or planting plans, as the case may be. Reconsider the soffit uplighting and bring back details of the garage gate.
Are those friendly amendments acceptable to?
They are.
Okay. Do you have any additional comments you wish to make? Okay. Board Member Guyer? No. Okay. Board Member Liu, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
I would say thank you for the amendments, and I think given the controversial nature of the project, I think my recommendation would be that it come back, that we continue the project, so that we have a full hearing and that the public can participate. When the subcommittees...
Is that a friendly amendment or an amendment there?
Well, let me just... Yeah, I mean, I think that's not a friendly amendment because it seems it goes against the regular... I think it goes totally against the motion. But But my take on it is a very controversial project. This is just the first hearing that we've had on this project. And
is that a substitute motion?
Well, I haven't counted votes. Are we saying this is? I think it's not.
I'm just asking you where you're going with this.
I think I'm voting no on the project based on what I think is going to be the vote.
Well, why don't you make a substitute motion? Maybe you'll have a supporter.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Propose a substitute motion, which is everything that was in the previous motion, but it come back to the board and not to subcommittee.
I can support that. I'll second that. Would you like to speak to your motion, your substitute motion?
I think that the on this particular project, I think the city's zoning is just fairly controversial. I mean, you're putting the zoning as we have it allows like a 50-foot high, predominantly office building, right up against RM40, which is only allowed to be 40 feet high, and our daylight plane requirements are fairly minimal in that particular circumstance. And also, I think while our zoning ordinance does, like our compatibility findings, does ask that like sunlight and privacy be provided or mitigated, we don't really have really great standards for that. Like it says sunlight, but it doesn't really say how much. And I look at the plans, and it seems like the units in building 2 really only get sunlight in the late afternoon. Like I'm thinking like after 3 or 4 o'clock, and it seems like that the building is going to shade them completely at that time of day, and it seems like that's allowable under our zoning ordinance, or maybe it's not, but it's not really very clear. So it seems like additional scrutiny on this particular project is warranted. I think also too that there are a number of things like air conditioning and noise which haven't been shown in the plans yet. Are an issue. Air conditioning units aren't allowed in setbacks. Is that correct? And then you only have 5 feet on your residential. You've got a residential 5-foot setback, so you have actually no room except to go up on the units. So it's really hard to put them. You're not going to be allowed to put them on the face of the building. So I think that there are enough issues where I think it's worthwhile for this to come back.
I'm going to speak to the substitute motion. I'm in agreement here with Board Member Liu. I think that, as they say, good fences make good neighbors, and so in this case, it's particularly important that we review this in the context of the immediately adjacent neighbors as well as the surrounding neighborhood. I think that we've had some really great testimony here today, and ultimately, when this comes back before us, hopefully a lot of these issues will be addressed and resolved. The minor details, I think, are particularly important to the success. I do have faith in the subcommittee, but I think that this proposal needs to move forward with the full support of the entire Architectural Review Board, as well as the concerns of the general public. And so I'm going to, I support Board Member Liu's substitute motion here. I had agreed to let the applicant have some closing remarks, and so you will have 5 minutes, and then we will we'll vote on the motions here.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
On the substitute motion, is that a continuance, or is that bringing it back to consent calendar with specific items?
I believe it was it was approving the project. Was that correct? And as well, but it would be moving, but it would come back to us with those items that were outlined in the substitute motion under being addressed. Is that correct?
I hadn't really thought about that. I was actually thinking continuance because I guess in my mind it was massing, but I realized that I think I may be I think we may have like two board members who are concerned about the massing. I think if it was, I think there's a majority support for for the massing. If I'm counting both, I think we're 3 in support of massing and 2 maybe looking for something slightly smaller.
Well, I just want to clarify something here, okay? First of all, you're reading into board member comments, not that there was anything decided that wasn't discussed in the public hearing right here, okay? So I want to clarify that, okay? So I could support it either way. I believe that it needs some additional discussion, and it's just a question of what those details are. So Board Member Guyer, and then we'll go back to Board Member Liu here.
Yeah, if we're discussing it this way, I agree. If it's going to come back, I think just a few of the little odds and ends, these sort of final little details that we talked about, isn't good enough. I agree that I have a real problem with the massing. And so if it comes back, then as far as I'm concerned, there needs to be some drastic changes rather than just, 6 inches here, 2 inches there, that sort of thing.
Board Member Liu?
Okay, I guess the way I'm thinking about it is, is if it's a massing issue, then it should come back to the full board and it should be continued. If we really think that it's just details of like lighting and landscape and stuff like that, then I think the approving the project with it to come back on consent is appropriate.
It is your substitute motion, so if we're going to vote on it, you have to be very specific.
Right. Well, my recommendation is to continue the project.
And my second still is valid. Board Member Pop?
Yeah, I want to just not disagree with you directly, but I want to just voice my opinion that we have before us a project which not only complies with zoning, but actually is in many ways less than the zoning regulation. It pulls back from setback lines, it pulls back from property adjacent, it meets, in my opinion, the criteria that we have set forth. It is not our role to design this building for the applicant, and I don't think that we're attempting to do that, but my opinion about this building is that it is quite compatible, that the massing and site organization are very thoughtful and appropriate, and short of really dramatically changing the organization of this building, we're not going to see a project that's wholly different. And I would hope that we as a board could assess the minor details that are the nuances, but the request to wholesale adjust the sculpting of this building to change the massing is not something that I feel we should be asking of this applicant because of the effort they have made to come in and under within the regulations.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pop. Okay, we have a motion with some friendly amendments, basically details that would need to come back to the board, and we have a substitute motion, which is to continue this item to a date certain or a date uncertain.
I think that's up to the applicant.
Okay.
Right?
There's a substitute motion for continuing the item, and I was just simply clarifying whether it would be a date certain or some date in the future. And so now is your chance, and you will have 5 minutes to address both of the motions.
I'm going to...
Do we get 10 minutes to address 2 motions?
No, you only get, no. We've been...
questions on the table.
I know. That's one of the reasons why we have a substitute motion here. So if you wouldn't mind.
I'm going to talk about 2 things really quick so Rob can have 4 minutes and 30 seconds to deal with design issues.
Okay.
Clarification, there will be no subdivision involved in this project. There are apartment units, not condominium units, 1 parcel total. And I think it's a fantastic idea. Screening is an important thing for both office users and residential users. And I am more than willing to investigate different species as well as larger sizes of trees between the buildings.
Okay, this is going to feel like NASCAR. And I'm sorry, because I've got 5 minutes, I don't want to spend 5 minutes fumbling around to find the sheet. This is to the point of the roof expression on Sherman. We have adjusted the detail and profile of that, as I've described, from December to now to thin that up. We need it environmentally. These shade studies show how that element, you're an architect, you know how this works. We need vertical surfaces on the western-facing facades in order to control western exposure, except in the sense that we can combine the setback at the third floor with that brow to substantively control solar intrusion on that third floor without resulting to a similar vertical regimen, which is something that the ARB had cautioned us against in December, and we're being respectful of that. We're keeping it, not to fly in your face, but keeping it because it's a performative need. Okay, just so that you understand where our mindset is. It's not that we're trying to put a stamp on the height. It's quite a functional device. As it relates to the park, a 1.3, I believe, and this is pursuant. Chris, which one is the overall elevation of the park? So an overall elevation that shows the context. It's the black and white drawing that shows the scale of the building. Here we go, A 3.1. My apologies. Item 2 shows the height of the residences relative to the existing residential condition that face the edge of the park and line the residential face. So admittedly, it's a few feet taller. That's driven by a couple of things. One, it's a much more expeditious and reasonable way to solve the structural separation between those units and the office building to keep it within the same structural solution. It's not an attempt to create excessively tall units. And in fact, the ground floor has a 30-inch stoop. So in fact, that floor to floor, that ground floor unit to the second level there actually isn't 14 feet 8. It's minus 3 inches from that. Additionally, the height of that upper level roof is dictated to create a usable outdoor space for the office building. So you can see that the floor levels are functionally needing to connect, and it results in a scale that's actually quite similar and poses no solar impact to any of the adjacent edges along there as well. I think in terms of height, what? I think responding to your subsequent revised motion, Commissioner Liu, I think that the applicant would be amenable to take 8 inches per floor out of this project to reduce the overall building height by 2 feet, which will, have a substantive impact on the massing and the shading. This is all at the margins, right? The higher you get, the more it shadows. The lower you get, the less it shadows. That leaves us with a 14-foot floor to floor, which is very commensurate with what one would expect in a commercial office building. So it's not excessive. So I think that's on the table for you to consider in your revised motion as you debate this. Anything else that we want to touch on?
Do you want to talk about the distance discussion of 12 feet between buildings? It really is for 27 feet because there's setback on
as it relates to Birch Court number 3, we want to reiterate that the faces of Birch Court number 3 that face the interior courtyard that's formed. A courtyard is not really a courtyard. It's a parking lot. It's not a courtyard. There are no windows of any living units that face that space. So the amount of and this is a sliding scale of issues that we're dealing with here. There are some parts of Birch Court too that have windows that are facing this building. We're doing our best to prejudice how the building responds to those as opposed to edges of the project that don't have windows, right, as opposed to those that do. So again, trying to deal with the height and the setback so that we're dealing with the shadowing of that as very best that we can, recognizing that there aren't living spaces that have direct view of the building. So again, and it relates to the 5-foot setback on the park, just so we're clear, the access points to those front doors do not occur within that 5-foot setback. They're on the other side of that 5-foot setback. And in fact, the base of that building has a planted edge and seating, which effectively become part of the park experience itself. So that's a lot in a short amount of time for your consideration.
Wow.
8 seconds.
Was that actually 5 minutes?
8 seconds left.
I'm impressed. Okay. So, the chair has the prerogative of either having the substitute motion or the main motion go first. I will have the main motion go first, and then, if need be, we will vote on the substitute motion. So, those in favor of the main motion with the friendly amendments say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. So now we'll vote on the substitute motion. The substitute motion is to continue this to a date uncertain, and staff, what is the date that we might be looking at for this? And that would require that the applicant...
Yeah, no, it's the 21st, August 21st. That would allow them to sculpt the
Okay. And when would they need to get documents into you for public review?
Well, we'd like to see them the first week of August. Well, the first week being the week of August 4th, because the staff report is prepared and circulated that same
Too
week.
late now. You only get one
And the rest is
substitute
not for
motion.
those 2 weeks, so I guess
No,
I'm
it is
picking up
correct.
the ball on that, or we look to a September date.
Okay. What does the applicant prefer? Because we want to put this on a date certain.
We prefer to be as early as possible.
Sorry. I'm sorry. The city attorney had something to say here.
I asked the city attorney whether it's possible to have a second substitute motion, and she believes it is acceptable.
Okay. Well, we can certainly do that, but we have to vote on the substitute motion first, don't we? The first substitute motion. It would have to fail in order for a second substitute motion.
The substitute motion is now the current motion on the floor, as the main motion just failed, and so there can be a substitute to the motion on the floor.
Okay, fine. So let's get back to the main substitute motion. Okay, and so that would be
August 21st is the date I'm talking not on the mic, but is the date that the applicant has expressed as the preference. The applicant has noted a off mic the preference for the August 21st date. So it's just a matter of getting plans turned around. The staff report will be slim due to the fact that we do not have the project planner here for 2 weeks during that time that the applicant's submitting plans and the public packet goes out for the ARB.
I'm going with the project planner on this. Okay. Vice Chair Pop, you have a substitute motion?
I do. I'd like to suggest a motion that we conform to all of the obligations in the motion presented by Board Member Liu, with the alternative that it come to consent calendar rather than the full review. And my intent in doing that is merely to allow us to assess the items that Board Member Liu has identified as being important for further evaluation, which really are things that the board, I think, has to grapple with, and not necessarily something that staff has to provide a lot of input on. And if the board is satisfied at that point, we can approve the project rapidly, in recognition of the fact that we've spent almost 3.5 hours on this today.
Okay, do I have a second on that that substitute motion?
I will second.
Can I get a clarification that substitute motion includes the proffered 8-inch reduction per floor? That just
yes, it would be all of the items that the applicant has offered as part of their approach to achieve consensus among the board.
Okay. So the main motion right now is to continue the item and the applicant to address each of the issues that were outlined in the motion. The substitute motion is exactly the same thing, with the exception that it would come as a consent item. Just so you're clear, a consent item requires one or more members of the board requesting that it be pulled from the consent calendar to be heard. However, public testimony would be granted prior to voting on the item, but there would be no discussion if it was a consent item, unless it was pulled. Huh?
Yeah. It's not
We don't have consent. We don't have consent rules written, so it has to be one. Okay. Yeah.
We would take the kind of unusual approach of advertising that meeting, unless if you're continuing to consent, then I believe we do not advertise it because we're stating it in a public hearing that we're continuing it, but it would have to be to a date certain.
Okay. So with that, we will vote on the main substitute motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. So now we have the substitute motion.
Wait, so who is?
Opposed.
Yeah, she
Three
mouthed. She
opposed.
mouthed it. I was watching.
Was that 4 opposed?
It was
Three
three
opposed.
Three
Okay.
opposed. Okay. So now we're at the main substitute motion, which basically is the same thing, except it puts it on consent. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed.
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 Okay. So we have nothing here. And we're running out of time, so it's almost 12 noon. So do I have another motion here? Okay, I'm going to make a motion simply to continue the item to a date certain, August 21st. Do I have a second on that?
Just to move us along, I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so that passes.
3 to 2,
So we just have simply continued this item to August 21st. Thank you very much for your patience and indulgence, and we will see you on August 21st.
Lee, who said yes to that? Lou?
It was Lou, myself, and Pot.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I know, it's terrible.
Are we taking a 2-minute break or no?
Why did you say continue? Yeah, why did you say to continue without?
Request by Philip Soralski of the Department of Public Works for architectural review of a master sign program with sign exceptions to allow the installation of a wayfinding signage at City Hall, Zone District Public Facility, environmental assessment exempt from provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act per SEQA Section 15-311. This was continued from the meeting of June 5th, 2014, and this will be the first public hearing. So, Mr. Soralski.
Hi, my name is Philip Soralski. I'm with Public Works Engineering. I'm the project engineer for the Civic Center or City Hall building renovation. This is a wayfinding project that was brought before the board previously as a study session. We got input at that time. We've revised all signage to hopefully meet the needs that were addressed. For the presentation, I have with me Michael Moore and Susan Bowers from Square Peg Design. And what I'd like to do is go through the presentation comprehensively. Then if we need to, we can go over each sign individually. So, Mike?
Hi, Mike Moore with Scorpeg Design. So what we're just going to go through is the revisions that were made. If you recall, a little over a year ago, we presented some options, some color patterning and shapes and forms. We've refined it. It's somewhat simplified. The color palette has been refined and is more in kind of in line with the branding, the Palo Alto branding. This slide shows locations around the perimeter of City Hall, identifying sign locations for project identity signing, identity entry points for the parking garage from the public plaza levels and sidewalk levels, entrance to the police station, and then just general directional and wayfinding signs. So at the corner, we have a new monument sign for the city of Palo Alto identifying the city hall. There's currently 2 options for the sign at the main entry. We've simplified it to City Hall, and this sign type, they're both illuminated. One is illuminated, halo illuminated against a darker background that you see the black perimeter, and then the other one illuminated from the face, a more simplified form. Then around the site, the palette has simplified from the color palette. It's a neutral gray with the green Palo Alto brand color used for the message areas. And then some directional signing in the landscape primarily around the sidewalk areas leading up into the plaza. And then at the stairs, the entry points into the garage from the plaza, we have these identity signs which are illuminated to identify that it's the entrance to the parking. And then directional information to where the handicap accessible entries are. So this gives you a depiction of how it would look once it's in place. The entry to the parking, really just identifying a pedestrian entry at the sidewalk, simplifying the graphics at the entry, the clearance bars, and the entry information. That's pretty much it.
That's terrific. Thank you very much for keeping your presentation concise. Okay, now we have time when members of the public may speak to this item. If there's any members of the public that wish to speak to this item, you may do so at this time. And seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And with that, I will return to staff for questions, and then we will have comments. Board Member Guyer.
Yeah, I just have one question. I think it's on the police sign. The entire arch is going to be part of the project, right? That's brand new.
And what's happening here too is we're mirroring the library across the street.
Okay. No, that was fine. That's the only thing I need. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, this structure is part of it, and then we have directional information on the sides.
That's the only question I had.
Board Member Liu, questions?
So great, thank you for the packet. It's very clear. And I just had a question on the City Hall signs above the front door. So you have the 2 different options, and I was wondering about your thoughts on them. I don't think I've ever seen like your first option. I'm not sure I've ever seen something like that sort of floating in front of a building, and I was wondering if there are any other like examples of that that you could share. And then I think my second question is on the second alternate, option 2, is I was wondering what you were thinking about. I was wondering about the visibility of that, meaning that it's fairly light colored and it sort of blends in with the white facade of the building, and if other colors or whatnot had been considered in that option.
Well, it's definitely, it's more neutral, and it's hard to depict in the photograph, and it's really from whatever vantage point. And the difficulty that we have here is we have the strong white columns and then the dark glass, and so if we do a dark letter, it doesn't read against the dark glass, and vice versa. So this is very subtle, and it's a sign that is less functional, but it's there. As you approach, you definitely would see it. This sign would be much more visible. We've done this before, and this method is done when you have an architectural background or a landscape background that just doesn't have a consistent kind of palette to contrast against. And we didn't want to put a box up there. We wanted to keep it light, and again, this would be much more legible, especially at night. You're gonna really read it at night, but in the day it still becomes a little more porous and not just a mass that we placed on the building. I think it's more consistent with particularly a public use. This is done. We've done this more probably in a retail setting, this type of thing, and maybe even in residential. But if it was a commercial building, it'd probably be treated differently. But we're trying to treat it more in a civic nature, and again, looking at the library and the way we're doing it, so we wanted to keep it consistently applied.
I kind of like the first option, but then it seems to me that the second option is more compatible with like the police sign. I would agree with that. Yeah, it is. It's just from a legibility standpoint. I think this would be successful. I mean, people know the building. It's going to have a sign at the street. It's got the, just architecturally, it's recognizable. So this is kind of a secondary reinforcement to help identify the entry and bring your attention to it. So I think this would be, either one of these would work. One is definitely going to be much more visible at night for passerbys, but the second option would achieve, I think, what we need just from an identity reinforcement standpoint.
Actually, the letters in the second option here and the letters at the police.
Can you use the microphone, please? Yeah, because we're being recorded.
The letters in the second option here and at the police, they illuminate on the returns, and the faces and the backs are solid, which is what happens at the library across the street. So the second option is really more consistent with the other two locations.
Okay, thank you. And I think I agree with all of that. And I think too, also like at the main library, we have there's some freeform signs that are just transparent, right? It's front and back. And so it seems like the second option and the police thing are compatible. Yeah.
All that I have. Board Member Malone Pritchard.
The entry signs at the garage, did you consider not doing those? There you do have the rectangular field of color with the letters applied to it. Did you consider just doing letters there instead?
Well, here we've got, I think these are dimensional. Aren't these dimensional letters? So they are dimensional letters similar to what's on the face. It's just that we have the background that's colored to contrast them.
Yeah, so I was wondering whether you'd consider just having the letters be contrasting to I believe that's concrete at that location. and not having the backing rectangles.
Have to defer to Susan on that one.
We did that option, I guess about a year or so ago. That was one of the options we started with, was dimensional letters just on the wall. But the conclusion was that everybody, in the meetings with the city and everything, we like the dark panel on the background. And they're reflective vinyl letters. They're not dimensional letters.
We were really trying to emphasize, Philip Sorelsky with Public Works Engineering, there's a big inconsistency when you see it. People really didn't notice the signs that are out there now, which is just the letters on the facing. There's a consistent pattern of people coming in the wrong driveway, going out the wrong way, and it's happened quite a bit of, and so we really want it to be pronounced this time, especially the exit only, because that does occasionally get traffic coming into it from the street.
And I think the red bar is going to help a lot with that. At least I hope so.
Okay, Vice Chair Pop.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the elevator stair IDs, and these panels that will be out on the plaza themselves, and just a general design question about why not integrate those with the structure that's already in place there. Why create another event out on the plaza, another object out there, rather than trying to incorporate it into what's there?
I think more than anything, just a consistency with all the other locations, so that it's the same form that you see, it's the same element.
Okay. And I think that's the only question I have right now.
Okay, first of all, thank you for coming forward with your proposal here. It's overall, it's very consistent with the signage program for the other that we've seen recently for other parks and other facilities within Palo Alto. It's this is the first one that has really followed the standards more or less that were originally prescribed to us. And I know that it's really difficult making a sans serif font or typeface look exciting, and I think you've done a really great job of doing that. I have one basic question: is no glass cube with an Apple logo on the in the plaza? I don't know if you know, but this building was done by Edward Durrell Stone. He did the GM building in New York, and of course the Apple store is a glass cube right in the middle of the plaza of the GM building, or what was formerly the GM building.
Right.
So anyway, but I'm very excited about what you've proposed here. A couple of questions I have with regard to the parking sign as you enter the garage. We've used a different standard on the public parking garages in Palo Alto. We've actually used a font or a typeface that has a it's also a sans serif font, but it has rounded corners to it. And what they've done is they've enlarged the first two letters of parking as PA and had made them distinctive from the ARKING. Did you look at that at all for the entryway?
It's my understanding, and maybe someone from planning can comment on this. And again, I'm Philip Sorelsky from Public Works Engineering. That there's a whole new city-wide project coming up for the parking garages. So we actually eliminated a little bit of the coloration, the large P, and one of the other signs from last time to be more consistent with what they're going to develop for all the garages. And at that time, this one would be transformed to match whatever they choose for site-wide through the city to be consistent in all the garages.
Okay, well, I think that's some humor that's lost, some typeface humor that's lost a little bit, and if that could be brought back, that would be something that I think would be terrific. But
well, I think, and And I understand what you're saying. I think what we've done here has been very specific to the building and the architecture and, you know, what's happening, like with the library and some of the, with the fonts and the design. And we did have, I don't know if you recall, we had a freestanding sign out here in the median that would be perpendicular to the street with the big public P, and we had the public P at the entries. So we've kind of left that out for now so that whatever happens with the overall garage branding program for the city can still come in here and work and be integrated into that entry point, and leave everything else to work architecturally with the building.
Okay.
So
well, I think that's fair. I'm just saying that the parking entrance sign isn't as exciting as the other elements, and I think it's a particularly important aspect to the proposal. Statewide, they've just initiated legislation. Actually, it's been voted on and approved. I think that all new buildings have to have charging stations. And so we already have charging stations. Is there any way to communicate that at the parking garage entrances a little bit better?
Sure. I mean, that's something that...
Okay. Julie, go ahead.
Jody Gerhardt, Senior Planner for the city. The Transportation Division is working on additional chargers in the City Hall parking garage. And so as part of that transportation project, they will be looking at signage for such things as the chargers.
Okay, well, that should be integrated into the proposal here is what I'm saying.
It is a separate project, but I think certainly Public Works and Transportation will be working closely on the design to make sure that they are compatible.
Okay. And then with regard to your signage for the entrance to the city, the front doors to City Hall get lost somewhat.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. And your marquee or the arch at the police entrance works particularly well. Is there a way to accentuate the entrance a little bit better? What I'm thinking is, you have the sign floating there. Is there a way to ground it, similar to how you've done with the police station? Maybe even have it come out from the building and embrace all four of those doors, so that it's a wayfinding, and it tells
you it's a portal at the entry.
Exactly.
Yeah, we did look at that in the very beginning. I think one of our concepts that we looked at, and it kind of morphed and went in this direction to stay simplified. But we did look at a portal initially, and I think.
Okay. So those are my main questions. We'll return to the board, and we can hopefully finish up with another round of comments and questions here. So, Board Member Guyer?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, the weakest thing on that whole building is finding the front door. I mean, it's a joke. You see it, and everything blends in so nicely. And that was my exact thought when I saw that's why I asked, is that part of this project? Is to literally take that with City Hall on top of it and mount it, let's say, 3 feet in front of those four doors, so you actually have a focal point as to where the front door is. As far as all the other things, I'm fine with most of it. I don't know, is it really necessary to have another, Palo Alto City or with the green sign next to the parking entry? Is that really necessary on both of those? I mean, those are secondary entries, but it just seemed like an awfully large sign for.
At the garage entry?
Yeah. No, not that one. The actual.
Yeah, that there.
One. I mean, the two green ones, I don't even know if those are. I mean, to me, they're not even really necessary. It just.
Well, there's a pedestrian sidewalk there that we're trying to get people, rather than walking down the ramps, we're trying to get them to highlight that's a sidewalk entry point there.
Well, I'm not arguing that, but it just seemed excessive. I mean, I would think once you're down there, you're going into the building. So I mean, And that was it. I mean, I'm very happy with it. Like I said, other than that, I mean, maybe when the colonnades were there, it was a little bit more obvious where the front door was, but now there's no clue. And you need something there. And rather than make it's tough to hang something off that building. So if we put something in front of it that's freestanding, which would then, as you said, match the police station and also the library, it would begin to tie those more together.
Board Member Liu?
I think I agree with everything that was just said. I guess my main question would be how is that City Hall sign above the front door? How does it actually, what touches the existing columns?
Looks like it's right there.
Oh, I see. So it's
Yeah, there's the channel that
Literally
a ledge doesn't attach. The letters don't attach to the building, and the bar does.
I see. Right. Okay. Yeah, it seems really tricky to do, no? I guess it's possible. Okay, I'm actually fine with that. I could support a freestanding portal as well. I think everything else looks good. The only question I had was really the yellow. There's not very much yellow, and you just have like a little bit of yellow at the garage entrance, and then you've got some like white lettering on the yellow clearance, head clearance on the on that, which seems to be very difficult to read. Yeah, so under the parking, I mean, typically if you're trying for legibility, I would think normally you would have contrast. So it would be like black letters on yellow, and then also I think the yellow is a little confusing. Like if you're trying to say like red, yellow, green, you're thinking like stoplights, right? And so it seems like a little confusing to have the yellow there. I think I understand you're trying to sort of say that there's a height issue. Yeah, and I know that the garage is low.
Well, but I mean, what you're saying sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
What you're saying with that is like, be very careful when it comes out because of the red, but don't worry about it when you come in. So you can smack your car going into the garage, but be careful going out. I think those ought to be both ought to be red. I mean, basically, those bars are, height clearances, right? I mean, that's the designation.
Well, one of them is don't enter, too. Don't come in this way.
Okay,
the red is don't come in here.
Okay.
The comment about the yellow is a minor thing for me.
Okay, Board Member Malone Pritchard.
When I looked at the sample board, I thought there were too many colors until I realized that the yellow was only there. And I think that is the case. That's the only place we've got yellow, right? Okay. So I'm fine with that. I actually prefer the main signage for City Hall, the one that's less legible. I actually like better without the black background. And I think it's okay to do a less legible sign there because it really is just a reinforcement. As you get closer in, it helps to bring you to the door, but you already know that City Hall long before you're trying to read those letters.
Vice Chair Pop.
Okay, I'm going to address a couple of comments made by others first. In terms of signage for the charging stations, please don't do that. We don't sign for commuter spaces. It's going to be the de facto standard in no time. So let's just not clutter up our buildings with all kinds of signage about this. If it's a state bill that they have to have the charging stations, people are going to know there's charging stations in the garage. So please don't start sticking stickers all over the building about that.
Possibly, is there something on the pavement?
Yeah, I just...
Well,
within
at the station,
the
there would
garage.
be signs in the garage.
Inside the garage? No problem. Let's go ahead and do that.
Time,
But on
one
the outside
speaker
of the
at a
building,
time.
I think too difficult to manage all of the requirements for that, and I'm quite concerned that we'd start to have a crazy-looking billboard. I do feel strongly that the pedestrian entry to the garage should be signed. I watch people, I wait for people who are walking up and down the ramp all the time, and I'm hopeful that that would encourage people to go to the right place. I would say that you don't need the yellow. I think if the bang bar to the entrance was green and the bang bar to the exit only was red, that would be great. And the bang bar with green with white lettering on it is going to be very legible, and I think that'll, you bang into that thing, you got a problem. So that's enough of a warning. And I would encourage you to just remove the yellow from the palette. I think it's not necessary. The option number 2 is my preferred option for the lettering style. And I don't have a strong feeling about the idea of creating a portal. I do believe that by the time you get close enough to the building, you kind of figure out where the door is. I was joking around at Shani Kleinhaus, who's been teaching us all about taking care of birds and things in the area, will be thrilled about this because it's a great place for them to sit. But the style of lettering that you have on the police arch, I think, is very nice. And in fact, what I wanted to really spend just a moment or two saying is that I'm thrilled with how this looks, and I think that the clarity of what you're producing here and the methodology for how you've organized it has such a nice logic to it that it shouldn't just be a master sign program for City Hall. We struggle all the time with how to make signage on other city buildings throughout Palo Alto, and I would really, this to me looks like the solution we've been looking for. Let's just make this the start of a standard for Palo Alto buildings, and that at other libraries and anything, any other public building, that this is the well we draw from. And I think that will help to alleviate a lot of the discussion that we end up having and a lot of the work that people end up doing because they don't have clarity about where to go with this. And so I would be very much in favor of essentially adopting much of what we have here as an overall city sign master program.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty much in agreement with everything that's been said here. Just as a point of clarification, to address Vice Chair Pop's comment with concern with regard to the electric charging. At some point, somebody's going to slap a little sticker or sign up that says electric charging because it is a statewide requirement, and I just want it to be integrated into the signage program, and I want to be proactive as opposed to something that's reactive. I don't want the signage program to move forward in a way that, again, people are going to start adding additional signs to it. So if it's not going to become a requirement, I don't have a problem with it. But if it is going to be a requirement, it needs to be integrated into the signage program. I'm in agreement with a comment that I believe Board Member Guyer said. It would be terrific if we had a portal or an archway at the parking entrances, and I think there's a really great opportunity to distinguish which is the entrance by simply creating that portal over that one entrance on each side, and actually having the letters saying parking, above it as a standalone, letters. I think that would be terrific, and it would be consistent with all the other signage that you've done here. And I also am in agreement that I think that making that portal at the front entranceway a little deeper maybe and away from the building, and there's a great opportunity there for even some backlighting so that where your letters are getting lost in proposal number 1, by doing some backlighting from the building, you could actually create a halo there and actually have those be the reverse where the letters are dark but everything else behind it is illuminated. And so it becomes a halo illuminated piece of signage. So I think that there's some great opportunity there. So those are my comments. Why don't do we have a motion here?
I'll make a motion.
Okay. Board Member
I'll move
Vice Chair.
Let's see. Move that we continue this item to a date certain to allow the applicant to provide us with an additional option for the sign out in front of the City Hall, and to provide us with some information about whether or not requirements for electrical vehicle charging signage should be included in the package or not, and understanding where that goes. I'll leave it to the applicant to decide whether we have a date certain for that or not. But in accordance with all the findings and the information that's in the report, move this forward to a future date.
Do we have a date certain? Can it be on August 21st? Yeah.
Does that give you enough time?
Yeah.
First or second?
21st. Yeah.
First or second?
Yeah, yeah, we get to be first on the agenda.
Oh, I
next
see what
time.
you're saying.
Business to be.
We'll be quick.
Other one's a full public hearing, yeah, why not?
Okay, great. So and I will second that. So we have a motion, a second to continue the item to August 21st. All those, is there discussion here? Discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
presentation. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have one item on for subcommittee, and the subcommittee members are Board Member Goyer and Malone.
No board announcements or bids or...
No, there aren't. You took care of that one.